Sign here, Mr. Hale, and your daughter lives. Refuse, and watch her die waiting for a surgery you'll never afford. Mason's hand trembled over the contract. 3 years of his life, his freedom, his very identity sold to the coldest woman in Los Angeles. All for Ellie, all for the 5-year-old girl with the fragile heart who called him daddy and deserved a father who could save her. He signed, and the Ice Queen smiled for the first time. What happens when a desperate father sells himself to a billionaire who's forgotten how to feel? When a little girl with crayons becomes the bridge between survival and love? Stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit like and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The elevator climbed 63 floors in near silence, its polished brass walls reflecting a man who barely recognized himself. Mason Hale tugged at his tie, borrowed, slightly frayed at the edges, the kind of thing you grabbed from a Goodwill rack when you couldn't afford to care about impressions. His reflection stared back. 34 years old, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. Shoulders still broad from the construction work that used to pay the bills, hands still calloused from fixing things that other people threw away. Those hands had held his daughter through 17 hospital visits in the past 18 months. Those hands had signed payment plans he couldn't honor. Those hands were about to sign something far worse. The elevator chimed, a soft, expensive sound that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and the doors slid open onto a reception area that looked like it belonged in a magazine. White marble floors, glass walls overlooking the Los Angeles skyline. A desk made of some kind of wood Mason couldn't name, manned by a woman whose suit probably cost more than his truck. "Mr. Hale?" She rose with practiced grace. "Ms. Cross is expecting you. This way." Mason followed, his work boots, cleaned but still obviously work boots, clicking against marble that had never known anything less than designer heels. He caught glimpses through glass walls as they walked. Conference rooms filled with people in perfect suits, offices decorated with art that cost more than houses. A world so far removed from his own that it might as well have been another planet. This was Cross Industries. This was the kingdom of Vivian Cross, and somehow, impossibly, she wanted to marry him. The assistant stopped before a set of frosted glass doors. "She'll see you now." A pause, something almost like sympathy flickering across her professional mask. "Good luck, Mr. Hale." The doors opened. Mason stepped into an office that could have swallowed his entire apartment 3 times over. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated one wall, framing the city below like a painting. The furniture was minimal, a glass desk, 2 leather chairs, a single orchid in a crystal vase, but everything screamed money. Old money, ruthless money, the kind of money that crushed people like him without even noticing. And behind the desk sat the woman who had summoned him here, Vivian Cross. She was younger than he'd expected, 31 according to the research he'd frantically done last night, though the magazines always made her look older, harder. Dark hair pulled back in a severe knot, a charcoal suit that could have been painted onto her frame. Eyes the color of winter storms, watching him with an assessment so clinical it made him feel like a specimen under glass. She was beautiful. She was terrifying. "Mr. Hale," her voice matched her eyes. Cool, controlled, the kind of voice that gave orders and expected them followed. "Sit." Mason sat. Not because he wanted to, every instinct screamed at him to run, but because his daughter's medical bills were scattered across his kitchen table like accusation-made paper, and this woman had promised to make them disappear. "You received my proposal." It wasn't a question, but Mason nodded anyway. "I got it." And I've got questions." Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Surprise, maybe. Irritation, certainly. "I've outlined everything clearly. 3 years. A marriage in name only. In exchange, your daughter receives full medical coverage, enrollment in the Westbrook Academy, and a trust fund upon completion of the contract." "You've outlined the what," Mason said, proud that his voice stayed steady. "Not the why. Why me, Ms. Cross? You could have any man in this city. Hell, you could have men lining up around the block to marry you for real. So why are you offering a fake marriage to a broke construction worker whose only qualification is being desperate enough to consider it?" Silence stretched between them. Vivian's fingers, long, elegant, ringless, tapped once against her glass desk. When she spoke again, something had shifted in her voice. Not warmth exactly, but something that might have been honesty. Because you're exactly what I need, Mr. Hale. Unremarkable, unthreatening, the kind of man no one will look at twice. She leaned back in her chair. I'm facing a hostile board. 6 men who believe a woman shouldn't run her father's company and who are using my unmarried status as ammunition. They're calling me unstable, emotional, incapable of forming lasting partnerships. Her lips curved in something too sharp to be a smile. A husband would silence them. A husband with a child would make me look softer. Mason felt the words like a punch. So I'm a prop. You're a solution. She said it without apology. And in exchange for 3 years of performances, your daughter gets everything you can't give her. Every surgery, every specialist, every chance. The words hung in the air between them. Mason thought about Ellie, about her smile, about the way she still believed he could fix anything, about the latest bill sitting on his table with final notice stamped across it in red, about the cardiologist who'd looked at him with pity and said, "There's a surgical option, but the waiting list is 2 years, and without insurance..." He'd stopped listening after that. What are the rules? He heard himself ask. Vivian's posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The stance of someone who'd won. Separate bedrooms. No physical intimacy of any kind. You'll attend public events when required and play the devoted husband for cameras. In private, we'll be strangers who share an address. She slid a leather folder across the desk. The full contract, 347 pages. Take it home, have it reviewed. I can't afford a lawyer. I know. She said it without cruelty, just fact. But I'm telling you to have it reviewed anyway. I want you to understand exactly what you're agreeing to. Mason looked at the folder but didn't touch it. What happens if I meet someone? If I fall in love? For the first time, something human flickered across Vivian's face. Something almost like pain, quickly buried. Then you'll wait 3 years, Mr. Hale. As will I. She stood, moving to the window, her reflection ghosting against the glass. Neither of us is in this for romance. You need money. I need armor. It's a transaction, nothing more. A transaction. His life, his freedom, reduced to a business deal. But Ellie's laugh echoed in his memory, that bright, beautiful sound that had grown weaker lately, interrupted too often by coughs and hospital beds and oxygen masks. His daughter, his whole world, waiting at home with a heart that was slowly failing. For her, he would become anything, even a rich woman's puppet. When do you need an answer? Vivian turned back to face him, and for just a moment, Mason could have sworn he saw something like respect in her eyes. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., my assistant will be waiting. She extended her hand, the gesture oddly formal, almost old-fashioned. Mason rose and took it. Her palm was cool and dry, her grip surprisingly firm. One more question, he said, not letting go. Vivian raised an eyebrow. You said, I'm exactly what you need. Unremarkable, unthreatening. He met her gaze and held it. How did you find me? Out of all the desperate men in Los Angeles, how did Vivian Cross end up in my apartment building's parking lot, offering to change my life? Something shifted in her expression. The cold mask slipping just for a heartbeat, revealing something underneath that Mason couldn't quite name. I saw you, she said quietly, 6 weeks ago, outside Children's Hospital. You were carrying your daughter, and she was crying because they told you there was nothing more they could do without surgery, and you... She paused, her voice catching on something that might have been memory. You told her that Daddy was going to fix it, that you would find a way, that she should never be scared because you would never ever let anything happen to her. Mason's throat tightened. He remembered that day, the worst day of his life. I had my driver pull over, Vivian continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I watched you carry her to your truck, that ancient thing held together with rust and prayers. You buckled her in so gently, like she was made of glass. And then you sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes and you cried. And when you were done, you wiped your face and you drove home and you started making calls trying to find money that didn't exist. She pulled her hand away from his. I've been researched by the best PIs in the country, Mr. Hale. I know everything about you. Your credit score, your work history, the fact that you once drove 30 miles on an empty tank to get your daughter to a dance recital because you couldn't afford gas and pride, the way you read to her every night, even when you're so exhausted you can barely keep your eyes open. Her mask slid back into place, cold and impenetrable. I needed someone who wouldn't try to manipulate me, someone who would do anything for their child, someone who looked at me that day in the parking lot like I was just another person in a suit, not a wallet with legs. I didn't see you that day. I know. The ghost of a smile. That's part of why I chose you. Mason stood there, processing. This woman, this ice queen who'd built an empire on being untouchable, had been stalking him, researching him, watching him fall apart, and she'd decided he was worth saving. Tomorrow, he said finally. 9 a.m. He turned and walked toward the door, feeling her gaze on his back with every step. His hand was on the handle when her voice stopped him. Mr. Hale. He looked back. Vivian Cross stood silhouetted against the windows, the setting sun painting her in shades of gold and amber, and for just a moment she looked almost human. She's a lucky girl, she said. Your daughter. Having someone who would sell his soul to save her. Mason's jaw tightened. I'm not selling my soul, Ms. Cross. I'm renting it. 3 years. Then I walk away and you never see me again. He left before she could respond. The drive home took an hour in traffic, plenty of time for Mason to second-guess himself 17 different ways. The contract sat on his passenger seat like a bomb, 347 pages of legal language that would bind him to a stranger with money, a stranger who could save Ellie. His apartment complex rose out of the twilight like a concrete tombstone, 3 stories of peeling paint, broken elevators, and people too tired to care. He parked his truck in the usual spot, grabbed the contract, and climbed the stairs to Unit 2B, his keys jingling in the quiet. Daddy! The door barely opened before 53 pounds of pure joy slammed into his legs. Mason dropped to his knees, catching Ellie in his arms, burying his face in her wild brown curls. Hey, Bug. Miss me? Only a little. Her grin was missing 2 teeth, the ones she'd lost last month, leaving adorable gaps that made every smile an adventure. Mrs. Rodriguez let me help make dinner. We made, She scrunched her face in concentration. Something. Enchiladas, called a voice from the kitchen. Elena Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The 60-year-old grandmother had been Ellie's unofficial babysitter since Mason moved in 2 years ago, accepting payment in gratitude and shared meals because she knew he couldn't afford actual childcare. And she was a very good helper, only dropped the cheese once. It jumped, Ellie protested. The cheese was slippery. Mason laughed, the first real laugh he'd managed all day. I believe you, Bug. Cheese is tricky like that. He stood, keeping Ellie balanced on his hip, despite the fact that she was really getting too big to carry. She'd been too big last year, actually, but he couldn't stop, couldn't let go. Every moment felt borrowed now, precious in a way it hadn't before the diagnosis, before he knew her heart was failing. Everything okay? Elena's eyes dropped to the leather folder in his hand. That looks official. It's nothing. The lie came too easily. Just some paperwork for a new job opportunity. Elena's gaze sharpened. She'd survived 3 husbands, raised 5 children, and buried 2 of them. Very little got past her, but she simply nodded, pressed a kiss to Ellie's forehead, and grabbed her purse. Enchiladas are in the oven. Keep warm another 20 minutes. She paused at the door, looking back at Mason with something that might have been worry. Whatever that paperwork is, mijo, make sure it's worth it. Some prices are too high, even for the people we love. Then she was gone, and Mason was alone with his daughter and the decision that would change both their lives. Daddy, you look sad. Ellie's small hand touched his cheek, her brown eyes, so like her mother's, searching his face with concern no 5-year-old should have to carry. I'm not sad, Bug, just tired. Is it because of the hospital? Her voice dropped to a whisper, like she was sharing a secret. I heard you talking to Mrs. Rodriguez last week about money and my heart and how you were going to fix it. Mason's chest constricted. He'd been so careful, so sure she hadn't heard. "Ellie, it's okay, Daddy." She pressed her small palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. "Your heart works good, and you always fix things, so you'll fix mine too, right?" He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe around the love and fear and desperate hope strangling his throat, so he just nodded, pulled her close, and made a promise against her hair. "I'm gonna fix it, Bug, whatever it takes." 347 pages, 3 years of his life, one chance to save his daughter. Mason didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table after Ellie had gone to bed, reading every single page of Vivian Cross's contract by the light of a lamp that flickered every 30 seconds. The legal language was dense, intentionally complex, but the terms were clear enough. For a period of 36 months, Mason Hale would present himself publicly as the husband of Vivian Cross. He would reside in her primary residence. He would attend corporate functions as required. He would make no public statements contradicting the narrative of their marriage. He would have no romantic or intimate relationships outside the marriage. In exchange, Vivian Cross would provide full medical coverage for Eleanor Rose Hale, including all surgical procedures, specialists, and medications. Guarantee enrollment at Westbrook Academy, one of the most exclusive private schools in California. Establish a trust fund of $2 million in Eleanor's name to be accessed upon her 18th birthday. Provide Mason with a monthly stipend of $15,000 for personal expenses. And at the end of 3 years, when the board was secured and the contract fulfilled, they would divorce quietly. No fuss, no drama, just two strangers walking away from a business deal. Mason's eyes kept returning to one line. No physical intimacy of any kind. The parties shall maintain separate bedrooms and conduct themselves as professional partners in a business arrangement, with all public displays of affection to be performed solely for the benefit of maintaining appearances. Professional partners. He thought about Sarah, his late wife, Ellie's mother, and the way she'd kissed him goodbye every morning for 3 years of marriage. The way her hand always found his under restaurant tables. The way she'd curled into him at night, her cold feet pressed against his calves, her breath warm against his shoulder. She'd been gone for 4 years now. Ovarian cancer, fast and brutal, taking her in 6 months flat. He'd never expected to love again, never wanted to. Sarah had been it for him, his person, his partner, his home. But this wasn't love. This was survival. The clock on the wall read 3:47 a.m. when Mason finally set down the contract and walked to Ellie's bedroom. He pushed open the door just enough to see her, sprawled across her tiny bed, one arm dangling over the edge, her stuffed elephant, Mr. Trunks, because she'd been 2 when she named him and very proud of her creativity, clutched against her chest. Her breathing was shallow, slightly labored, the sound of a heart working too hard to pump blood through a body that deserved so much better. Mason leaned against the door frame and watched his daughter sleep, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the scatter of freckles across her nose, the way her lips curved into a smile even in dreams. 4 years old when Sarah died. 5 years old when the doctors told him her heart was failing. She didn't remember her mother's voice, but she still reached for her in nightmares. She didn't understand words like congenital heart defect and surgical intervention, but she knew that hospitals meant scary machines and shots that hurt. She didn't know that her father had sold his car, maxed out 3 credit cards, and taken a second job just to keep her alive this long. And she would never know that he was about to sell himself to a woman who looked at love like a disease to be avoided. "Whatever it takes, Bug," Mason whispered into the darkness. "Whatever it takes." At 8:47 the next morning, Mason walked back into the lobby of Cross Industries. He was wearing the same suit he'd worn yesterday, his only suit, the one he'd bought for Sarah's funeral. It still fit, mostly. He'd lost weight since then, the kind of weight that stress and skipped meals carved away, but the shoulders still filled out right, and the tie covered the slight fraying at his collar. The same assistant was waiting. "Mr. Hale, right this way." The walk to Vivian's office felt shorter today. Maybe because he'd made his decision, maybe because the fear had been replaced by something harder, more determined. This time Vivian was standing when he entered. She was wearing white today, a sharp contrast to yesterday's charcoal, and it made her look younger somehow. less like a CEO and more like a woman who might have been beautiful if she ever learned to smile. You're early. I didn't sleep. He set the contract on her desk. I read every page. And? Mason met her eyes. I have conditions. That flicker again. Surprise. Quickly hidden. The contract is non-negotiable, Mr. Hale. No, but the way we live it is. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. His own list, written in pen at 4 a.m. while his daughter slept and his conscience screamed. I'll be your fake husband. I'll play the role, attend the events, smile for the cameras. But there are things that aren't in your contract. Things about how we treat each other. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Such as? You will never speak to my daughter with anything less than respect. You will never use her as a prop, never drag her into the public games, and never make her feel like she's less than wanted in that house. I have no intention of, I'm not finished. His voice was quiet, but something in it made her stop. I will be faithful to this contract. I will keep your secrets and protect your reputation. But in return, you will treat me like a human being, not a piece of furniture. You will say please and thank you. You will acknowledge my existence when we pass in the hallway. And if you ever talk down to me in front of my daughter, the deal is off. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the school. I will walk out that door and you'll never see me again. Silence stretched between them. Mason watched Vivian's face, searching for the calculation, the cold dismissal he expected. Instead, he saw something else, something that looked almost like recognition. You've been talked down to before, she said softly. By wealthy people. By people who thought their money made them better. Every day for the past 10 years. He didn't flinch. I'm a construction worker. A handyman. The kind of guy rich people call when something breaks and forget exists the moment it's fixed. I know exactly what I am in your world, Ms. Cross. And what's that? Invisible. He leaned forward. But I won't be invisible to my daughter, not ever. So either you agree to treat us like people, or I walk. Right now. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, she picked up the folded paper, his conditions, and read them. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. You want regular family dinners, she said, almost to herself. Attendance at school events. Permission to maintain the house as you see fit. That house is going to be Ellie's home for 3 years. I won't have her living somewhere that feels like a museum. And this last one, genuine kindness, or at minimum, the convincing appearance of it. Vivian looked up, and for just a moment, Mason could have sworn he saw the ghost of a smile. You're asking me to be nice, Mr. Hale? I'm asking you to try. She set the paper down, picked up a pen, and in one smooth motion signed her name across the bottom of his conditions. There. She slid it back across the desk. Anything else? Mason stared at the signature. Elegant, decisive, nothing like his own cramped scrawl. She'd agreed, just like that. No argument, no negotiation. Why? He asked before he could stop himself. Why agree so easily? You could have anyone, someone who wouldn't have demands, who wouldn't push back. I could. Vivian set down the pen and folded her hands. But I chose you, and I'm beginning to think I chose correctly. She stood, extending her hand. Welcome to the family, Mr. Hale. The wedding was 3 days later. No guests, no flowers, no music. Just a courthouse, a judge, and 2 lawyers making sure every I was dotted and every T crossed. Mason wore his funeral suit for the 3rd time that week. Vivian wore cream silk that probably cost more than his truck. Ellie wore a yellow dress covered in tiny sunflowers, because she'd picked it out herself, and Mason couldn't say no to her smile. You may kiss the bride. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Mason looked at Vivian, his wife now, legally if not emotionally, and saw the same uncertainty flickering behind her mask. They hadn't discussed this. The contract forbade intimacy, but a wedding without a kiss would raise questions. Slowly, deliberately, Vivian leaned forward. Her lips brushed his cheek, cool and brief, like a door closing. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Cross, the judge said, oblivious to the transaction he'd just made official. And just like that, Mason Hale was married to a stranger. The mansion was exactly what he'd expected. Massive, beautiful, and cold. 10,000 square feet of marble floors and vaulted ceilings and rooms that looked like they'd never been used. A kitchen the size of his entire apartment. A living room with furniture that seemed designed for photography, not comfort. A pool in the backyard that sparkled under the California sun like something from a movie. And everywhere, silence. The kind of silence that accumulated in spaces where no one lived, only existed. "Your rooms are in the East Wing," Vivian said, leading them through an endless maze of hallways. Her heels clicked against marble with the precision of a metronome. "The master suite is mine. You'll have the guest suite adjacent to it, for appearances, but your daughter's room is down the hall, so you'll have privacy." "Our rooms." Ellie tugged at Mason's hand, her eyes huge as she tried to take in everything at once. "Daddy, this house is bigger than the park." "It's big, Bug." "Can I explore?" "Later. Let's get settled first." Vivian stopped before a set of double doors and pushed them open, revealing a bedroom that made Mason's throat tighten. It wasn't just beautiful, it was designed for a child. Purple walls, Ellie's favorite color, somehow known. A canopy bed with gauzy curtains that billowed in the breeze from an open window. Shelves filled with books and toys that still had their tags. A window seat overlooking the garden, piled with cushions in every shade of lavender. Someone had done their research. Someone had tried. "Do you like it?" Vivian's voice was carefully neutral, but Mason caught the way her fingers tightened on the doorframe. Ellie was frozen in the doorway, her small body trembling. "Bug?" Mason knelt beside her. "What's wrong?" "It's purple," she whispered. "Everything's purple. Like Mommy's eyes." Mason's heart cracked. Sarah's eyes had been brown, not purple, but Ellie had been convinced for years that her mother's eyes changed color in heaven, and she'd decided they were purple, her favorite color ever since. "Yeah, Bug." He pulled her close. "Like Mommy's eyes." Ellie looked up at Vivian with an expression that was part wonder, part confusion. "Did you know about Mommy's eyes?" Something flickered across Vivian's face, too quick to name, and then her mask slid back into place. "I knew purple was your favorite. I hoped the room would make you feel at home." "Thank you." Ellie's voice was solemn, the way only a 5-year-old's could be. "It's the prettiest room I ever saw." For just a moment, Mason thought he saw Vivian's mask crack. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked away, her heels clicking against marble that had never known anything but silence. The first week was an exercise in careful choreography. Mason learned the rhythms of the house quickly. Vivian left for work at 6 a.m. and returned after 8 p.m., if she returned at all. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Margaret, handled the cooking and cleaning with brutal efficiency. The groundskeeper, Thomas, spoke maybe 3 words a day, all of them about plants, and Ellie, curious, fearless, determined, explored every inch of the mansion like a pioneer mapping new territory. "Daddy, there's a room with just one chair." "That's a meditation room, Bug." "But why would you need a whole room for one chair?" "Rich people are weird." Mason spent his days learning to be invisible in the right ways. He attended orientation at Westbrook Academy with Ellie, surrounded by parents whose watches cost more than his car. He met with specialists Vivian's money had made accessible overnight, a pediatric cardiologist, a cardiac surgeon, a team of nurses who would manage Ellie's care. He learned medical terminology that had been gibberish a week ago: ventricular septal defect, surgical repair, recovery timeline. Words that meant his daughter had a chance. At night, when Ellie was asleep and the house settled into its vast silence, Mason found himself wandering. The mansion had 43 rooms, he'd counted, and most of them were empty, designed for parties that never happened, filled with furniture that no one touched. But there was one room that was always occupied. Vivian's study was on the top floor, accessible via a spiral staircase that felt like it belonged in a lighthouse. Mason never entered. He wasn't suicidal. But he walked past the base of those stairs every night on his way to the kitchen, and every night he could see the light burning above. She worked until 2, sometimes 3 a.m. Then she slept for 3 hours and started again. Does she ever stop? he asked Margaret one morning when Ellie was at school and the silence had grown too heavy. The housekeeper paused in her dusting. Ms. Cross hasn't taken a vacation in 6 years, hasn't had a sick day in 4. Last Christmas, she was on a conference call while the rest of us ate dinner. That's not living, that's just surviving. Margaret's expression softened infinitesimally. Some of us don't know the difference, Mr. Hale. But the first crack in the routine came 3 weeks in. Mason was in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes for Ellie's Saturday breakfast. The stove had more settings than his truck's dashboard, when the sound of small feet made him turn. Daddy, the lady is sick. Ellie stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her face creased with worry. What lady, Bug? The one with no smile. Ellie's designation for Vivian, observed but never spoken aloud until now. She's sleeping on the couch in the glass room and she's making sick sounds. Mason's stomach dropped. The glass room was Vivian's study. Stay here, Bug. Eat your pancakes when they're done. He took the spiral stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with something he couldn't name. The door to the study was ajar, and through the gap he could see exactly what Ellie had described. Vivian Cross collapsed on a leather sofa, shivering despite the blanket someone had draped over her. Her face was pale, her forehead sheened with sweat, and even from the doorway Mason could hear the rasp in her breathing. She was burning up. Miss Cross? Her eyes flickered open, unfocused, glassy with fever. Who? She tried to sit up and failed, falling back against the cushions. What are you doing here? Your daughter told me you were sick. She's not my... Vivian's protest dissolved into a cough that shook her entire frame. Mason crossed the room in 3 strides. His hand pressed against her forehead before she could protest, and the heat radiating from her skin confirmed what he already knew. You have a fever. A bad one. He looked around the study, papers scattered everywhere, a laptop still glowing with spreadsheets, empty coffee cups forming a small army on the desk. When did you last eat? I'm fine. That's not what I asked. Her jaw tightened, and even sick, even shaking, she managed to summon a glare that would have terrified boardrooms. This isn't part of our arrangement, Mr. Hale. You don't need what? Someone to care that you're killing yourself? He shook his head. I've got a daughter who spent a year watching her mother die. I know what it looks like when someone stops taking care of themselves, and you're about 3 days from a hospital bed. The mention of Sarah, or maybe the mention of death, seemed to puncture something in Vivian's resistance. She closed her eyes, and for just a moment she looked young, fragile, human. The board meeting is Tuesday, she said quietly. You have to rest. Mason's voice softened despite himself. Whatever you have to prove, you can't prove it from an ICU. Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Vivian nodded. Mason helped her to her bedroom, a process that involved more physical contact than their contract technically allowed, but he figured carrying a barely conscious woman didn't count as intimacy. Her suite was exactly what he'd expected, enormous, immaculate, and utterly impersonal. A bed that could sleep 6. Curtains that blocked every ray of sun. Nothing on the walls but a single photograph of a man Mason didn't recognize. Her father, maybe. The one who'd built this empire and left it to a daughter who didn't know how to stop fighting for it. He settled her under the covers, found a thermometer in her bathroom, 104.2, which was terrifying, and called the family doctor whose number was programmed into the house phone. Then he went back downstairs, made soup from whatever he could find in the industrial refrigerator, and carried it up on a tray with crackers and water and the cold medicine he'd found in her cabinet. You don't have to do this, Vivian said when he set the tray down. Her voice was hoarse, her eyes still too bright with fever, but some of her sharpness had returned. It's not in the contract. Neither is watching you die. Mason sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining careful distance. Eat the soup, take the medicine, and maybe, just maybe, consider that 3 hours of sleep a night isn't sustainable for anyone, even someone as determined as you. She studied him for a long moment. Why do you care? It was a genuine question, Mason realized. Not defensive, not suspicious. She genuinely didn't understand why anyone would care about her well-being. Because you're a person, he said simply, and people take care of each other. That's how it works. Vivian's throat moved. Something glistened in her eyes, quickly blinked away. The soup is probably terrible, Mason added, standing. I'm not much of a cook, but it's hot, and it's food, and my grandmother always said that was half the battle. He was at the door when her voice stopped him. Mason. He turned. She'd never called him by his first name before. Vivian held his gaze, and for just a moment the mask was completely gone. In its place was something raw, vulnerable, real. Thank you. 2 words, simple. But from a woman who'd probably never said them without a contract demanding it, they felt like a victory. The fever broke on Sunday night. Mason knew because he'd been checking on her every 3 hours, ignoring her protests, ignoring the contract, ignoring everything except the fact that someone had to make sure she didn't die alone in a mansion full of empty rooms. Monday morning, he found her in the kitchen. She was wearing silk pajamas and a robe that probably cost more than his first car, her hair loose around her shoulders for the first time since he'd met her. Without the severe bun, without the suits, without the armor, she looked almost soft, almost approachable. You're supposed to be in bed. Vivian looked up from the cup of coffee she was nursing. I'm supposed to be at work. This is a compromise. A bad one. Noted. She took a sip, watching him over the rim of the cup. Where's Ellie? Still asleep. She was worried about you, by the way. Kept calling you the lady with no smile and asking if you were going to be okay. Something flickered across Vivian's face. She said that? She says a lot of things. Most of them more perceptive than any 5-year-old has a right to be. Mason moved to the coffee maker, pouring himself a cup. She draws you, you know, has a whole collection. I found them in her sketchbook last week. She draws me? You're always standing alone, in big rooms with lots of windows. Mason leaned against the counter, cradling his mug. She calls them the lonely lady pictures. Vivian's jaw tightened. I'm not lonely. I didn't say you were. I said that's what she sees. Silence stretched between them, but it was different now. Less hostile. More like 2 strangers who'd shared a trench, acknowledging the experience without knowing how to talk about it. The board meeting was rescheduled, Vivian said finally. Wednesday instead of Tuesday. My assistant handled it. Good. I'm still not taking a vacation. Nobody asked you to. And this doesn't change anything. Her voice hardened, the mask sliding back into place. We're still strangers, Mr. Hale. This arrangement is still temporary. I just wanted to be clear about that. Mason set down his coffee and met her eyes. I never expected anything different, Ms. Cross. He left her alone in the kitchen with her cold coffee and her carefully constructed walls. But as he climbed the stairs to check on Ellie, he couldn't help wondering what it would take to make the Ice Queen smile. But the months that followed settled into something almost like routine. Mason learned the rhythms of his new life. Morning drop-offs at Westbrook Academy, where Ellie charmed teachers and made friends with the same fearless energy she brought to everything. Afternoons spent maintaining the mansion because he couldn't sit idle, couldn't accept charity without contributing something, and Vivian's estate was in worse shape than its pristine exterior suggested. Evenings of homework and dinner and bedtime stories, the same rituals he'd maintained in the apartment, now performed in rooms that cost more than his yearly salary. And through it all, Vivian was a ghost. She appeared for scheduled events, company galas, charity dinners, the occasional photo opportunity, and during these moments they performed their roles perfectly. She smiled for cameras. He held her hand when required. They spoke to each other with the practiced warmth of longtime couples, saying nothing real while saying everything expected. Then the cameras stopped, and the ice returned. Weeks passed. Months. Seasons changed outside the massive windows, and inside the mansion, nothing changed at all. Until the night everything did. It started with a cough. Ellie had been tired that afternoon, too tired for a 5-year-old who'd just learned to ride a bike in the massive driveway. Mason had chalked it up to the excitement, the new school, the adjustment to a life that was still overwhelming in its excess. He'd put her to bed early, kissed her forehead, promised to check on her before he went to sleep. At midnight, he woke to silence. The wrong kind of silence. Mason was out of bed before he fully understood why, his feet carrying him down the hallway on pure instinct. Ellie's door was ajar, her nightlight casting purple shadows across the walls. She was sitting up in bed. She was gasping for air. "Daddy," her voice was a wheeze, each word a battle. "Daddy, I can't breathe." Mason's world narrowed to a single point, his daughter struggling for each inhale, her lips tinged with blue. He ran. 3 flights of stairs, 50 feet of hallway, his fist pounding against Vivian's bedroom door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Vivian! Vivian! I need help!" The door flew open. Vivian stood there in silk pajamas, her hair wild, her eyes alert with the instant wakefulness of someone who'd never fully trusted sleep. "What? It's Ellie. She can't breathe. I need... His voice broke. "I don't know what to do." For one terrible second, Vivian didn't move. Then something shifted in her face. Something human. Something fierce. "Follow me." She was already running, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp with authority. "This is Vivian Cross. I need my medical team at the Bel Air residence immediately. Pediatric cardiac emergency. I don't care what time it is. Get Dr. Okonkwo on the phone now." They reached Ellie's room, and Mason's heart shattered. His daughter was worse. The blue had spread from her lips to her fingernails, and she was barely conscious, slumped against her pillows like a marionette with cut strings. "Baby?" Mason gathered her into his arms, his whole body shaking. "Baby, stay with me. Stay with Daddy. Help is coming." Vivian knelt beside them, her phone still pressed to her ear, but her free hand reached out and touched Ellie's face. Gentle, almost tender. "Hello, little one," she said softly. "You're being very brave. Can you keep being brave just a little longer? There are doctors coming who are going to help you feel better." Ellie's eyes fluttered open. The lady?" "Yes, the lady with no smile," Vivian's voice caught. "But I'm going to try, okay? I'm going to try to smile for you if you keep being brave." Mason watched, frozen, as Vivian Cross, the Ice Queen, the untouchable CEO, the woman who'd built walls around her heart like fortresses, smiled at his daughter. It wasn't practiced, wasn't polished, was barely even a smile at all. But it was real, and Ellie smiled back. The next 3 hours were a blur. Medical teams arriving in the driveway. Equipment Mason didn't recognize being wheeled through hallways he'd walked 100 times. Voices speaking in a language of acronyms and measurements that meant nothing to him except the way they made his blood run cold. Vivian never left. She stood in the corner of Ellie's room, still in her pajamas, still disheveled, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. She made calls, gave orders, summoned specialists who arrived in helicopters, for God's sake, because apparently that was a thing you could do when you had unlimited money and a child who needed saving. And when the crisis passed, when Ellie's oxygen levels stabilized and her color returned and the doctors finally stopped looking quite so terrified, Vivian walked over to where Mason sat slumped in a chair, too exhausted to move, too grateful to speak. "She's going to be okay," Vivian said quietly. "They want to move up the surgery. Next week instead of next month. I've already approved it." Mason looked up at her. This woman who'd bought him like property. This stranger who'd designed a purple room for a child she barely knew. This ice queen who'd smiled, actually smiled, for the first time in months, because his daughter had needed her to. "Why?" His voice was raw. "Why did you do all this? Why do you care?" Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat down in the chair beside him, closer than they'd ever been when cameras weren't watching. "I told you why I chose you," she said. "In that parking lot. The way you looked at me like I was just a person. You are just a person." "No." She shook her head and something cracked in her voice. "I'm the Cross heiress, the CEO, the target, the symbol. I haven't been just a person since I was 16 years old." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was barely a whisper. "But your daughter looks at me like I'm a person. Every time. She doesn't see the money or the power or the walls. She just sees me, whatever that is." Mason's throat tightened. "She drew a picture of me smiling," Vivian continued, 2 months ago. "I found it on the kitchen counter. She'd written 'someday' at the bottom." A pause. I've never had anyone believe I could be happy before. The silence between them was different now, not cold, not hostile, something else entirely. The contract, Mason started. I know what the contract says. Vivian turned to face him, and her eyes, those storm gray eyes, were glistening. But sitting in that parking lot 6 months ago, watching you fall apart because you couldn't save your daughter, I thought I understood desperation. I thought I knew what it meant to do anything, to survive. And now? She looked toward Ellie's room, where the doctors were still monitoring, still watching, still making sure the crisis was truly past. Now I think I might have been wrong. Her voice broke. I didn't marry for survival, Mason. I married because you looked at me like I was worth looking at, and I've been so terrified of what that means that I've spent 6 months pretending it meant nothing. Mason reached out. His hand found hers, cool and dry, like it had been that first day in her office. But this time, she didn't pull away. What does it mean? He asked quietly. Vivian's fingers tightened around his. I don't know, she admitted, but maybe we could find out. In the purple room down the hall, a little girl with a fragile heart slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. And in the hallway outside, 2 strangers sat in silence, holding hands in the darkness, no longer quite as strange to each other as they'd been before. The surgery was scheduled for Tuesday. 7 days of waiting. 7 days of watching Ellie color in her purple room, pretending everything was normal while her heart struggled with every beat. 7 days of Mason pacing hallways he'd never expected to call home, counting hours like a man on death row. And 7 days of something shifting between him and Vivian Cross. It started small. A cup of coffee waiting for him on the kitchen counter each morning, still steaming, prepared before Vivian left for work. A text message at noon, brief and businesslike, but unmistakably intentional. How is she today? A presence in the doorway each evening when she returned, hovering for just a moment before retreating to her study, as if checking that they were still there, that they hadn't vanished like a dream she'd been foolish enough to believe in. Mason noticed. He noticed everything now, the way you notice details when the world has been stripped down to its essentials, the way Vivian's heels slowed when she passed Ellie's room, the way her voice softened, almost imperceptibly, when she spoke his daughter's name, the way she looked at him sometimes, when she thought he wasn't watching, with an expression that was equal parts hunger and terror, like she wanted something she'd trained herself never to want. On the 4th day, Ellie asked if Vivian could read her bedtime story. Mason was sitting on the edge of the bed, goodnight moon open in his lap, when his daughter's small hand touched his wrist. Daddy? Yeah, Bug. Can the lady read tonight? Ellie's eyes were serious, the way only a child's could be when asking for something that mattered. She has a pretty voice. I heard her on the phone once, talking to someone about numbers, and even the numbers sounded pretty. Mason's throat tightened. I don't know if she's home yet, Bug. She works late. She's home, Ellie pointed toward the window. I saw her car, the fancy one with the quiet engine. Of course she had. Nothing got past his daughter. Nothing ever had. Mason closed the book and stood. I'll ask her. But she might be busy, okay? She has a lot of important things to do. More important than stories? It was an innocent question, a child's question, but it landed somewhere in Mason's chest with the weight of an accusation. No, Bug, he said quietly. Nothing's more important than stories. He found Vivian in the kitchen, which was strange enough on its own. She was standing at the island, a glass of wine untouched beside her, staring at nothing. Still in her work clothes, still armored, but something in her posture suggested the armor was heavier tonight than usual. Long day. She startled, spinning toward him with the coiled readiness of someone who'd learned early that surprises were rarely pleasant. When she saw it was him, she relaxed, but only slightly. Every day is long. She picked up the wine, took a sip, set it down without really drinking. How is she? Good. Tired? Mason leaned against the doorframe, maintaining the careful distance that had become their default. She has a request, actually. A request? She wants you to read her bedtime story. The wine glass stopped halfway to Vivian's lips. Me? You. Mason couldn't quite suppress a smile at her expression, somewhere between panic and wonder. She says you have a pretty voice, that even numbers sound pretty when you say them. Vivian set down the glass with more force than necessary. I've never... She stopped, took a breath, tried again. I wouldn't know what to do. You read the words on the page. You do the voices if you're feeling ambitious. You kiss her forehead when you're done. Mason shrugged. It's not complicated. Everything's complicated. Not this. He pushed off from the doorframe and crossed the kitchen, stopping just close enough to see the uncertainty swimming in her eyes. She's a kid who wants a story, Vivian, that's all. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up. Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe? Or memory. No one ever read to me, she said quietly. Not after my mother died. My father he wasn't the bedtime story type. Mason thought about the photograph in her bedroom. The stern-faced man who'd built an empire and left his daughter to defend it alone. Then maybe this is your chance to learn. Vivian held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. They walked to Ellie's room together, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and Mason tried not to think about how natural it felt. How right. Ellie's face lit up when she saw Vivian in the doorway. You came! I came. Vivian approached the bed like she was approaching a negotiation, cautious and calculating. But when Ellie patted the mattress beside her, she sat, stiffly, awkwardly, as if she'd forgotten how bodies were supposed to work. Mason handed her the book and retreated to the chair in the corner, watching. Good night, Moon, Vivian read, her voice uncertain. By Margaret Wise Brown. You have to show the pictures, Ellie instructed. That's the rule. Of course. Vivian turned the book so Ellie could see, and something in her posture shifted, softened. In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of... She read the whole book. Her voice started stiff, self-conscious, but by the third page, something had changed. The words flowed more easily. The rhythm found itself. And when Ellie giggled at her attempt at the quiet old lady whispering hush voice, Vivian smiled. Actually, smiled. Not the calculated smile from press photos or the desperate smile from the night Ellie couldn't breathe. A real smile, surprised out of her by a child's laughter, and Mason felt something crack open in his chest. The end, Vivian said softly, closing the book. Good night, Moon. Good night, stars, Ellie murmured, her eyes already heavy. Good night, lady. Vivian's breath caught. Good night, Ellie. She leaned down, hesitated, then pressed a kiss to Ellie's forehead, quick and uncertain, like she wasn't sure she had the right, but she did it. Mason met her at the door as she slipped out, and they stood together in the hallway, watching through the gap as Ellie's breathing evened into sleep. She called me lady, Vivian whispered. Not the lady, just lady. Progress. Vivian turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears if she'd allowed them to fall. I don't know how to do this, Mason. Any of it. I don't know how to be whatever she needs me to be. Nobody does. He reached out, almost without thinking, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. That's kind of the secret of parenting. You just keep showing up and hoping you don't screw it up too badly. She didn't pull away from his touch, didn't retreat behind her walls. Instead, she leaned into it, just slightly, like a flower turning toward sun it had never expected to feel. What if I screw it up badly? Then you apologize and try again. Mason let his hand drop, but he didn't step back. That's how it works. That's how all of it works. They stood there in the hallway, inches apart, breathing the same air. Thank you, Vivian said finally, for asking me, for letting me. She asked for you, Mason reminded her. I just delivered the message. Still, Vivian's voice was barely audible. Thank you. She turned and walked toward her room, and Mason watched her go, wondering when the Ice Queen had started to thaw, and what it would mean for both of them when she finally melted. The surgery happened on a Tuesday morning that felt like the end of the world. Mason had been awake since 3 a.m., sitting in the chair beside Ellie's bed, watching her sleep, memorizing every detail of her face in case He couldn't finish that thought. Couldn't let himself go there. Vivian found him at 5, still in the chair, still watching. "The car will be here in an hour," she said softly from the doorway. "I've arranged for private transport to the hospital. Dr. Okonkwo's team is already prepping." Mason nodded without looking up. His hand was wrapped around Ellie's, careful not to disturb the IV port the home nurses had placed last night. "Mason!" Vivian crossed the room and knelt beside his chair, her silk robe pooling on the carpet. "Look at me." He did. And what he saw in her eyes wasn't pity, wasn't the professional distance he'd expected. It was fear, raw and honest and completely unhidden. "She's going to be okay," Vivian said, like she was willing it into existence. "I've hired the best cardiac team in the country. I've reviewed their credentials personally. The success rate for this procedure is 97%. And the other 3%? Vivian's jaw tightened. "I don't accept those odds. Not for her." Something broke loose in Mason's chest. The wall he'd been building since the diagnosis, the one that kept him upright and functional and not screaming into the void. It crumbled, just for a moment, and what came out was the voice of a terrified father who'd already lost too much. "I can't lose her, Vivian." His voice cracked. "She's all I have. She's everything. If something happens in that operating room, then we'll face it together." The words hung between them. Mason stared at her, this woman who'd started as a transaction and somehow become something else, something he didn't have a name for yet. Together? Vivian's hand covered his where it rested on Ellie's, cool and dry, but steady, unshakable. "I didn't sign that contract for company," she said quietly. "I didn't bring you into my home because I wanted a family. I told myself it was business, protection, armor. But I was wrong." Her voice broke on the last word. "I was wrong about so many things, Mason. And I don't know what any of this means or where it's going or whether I even have the right to feel what I'm feeling, but I know I can't watch you go through this alone. I know that little girl matters to me in ways I didn't think I was capable of anymore. And I know that if something happens to her, it won't just be you who's destroyed." Mason turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "The 3%, he said. "I won't accept it." "Neither will I." They stayed like that until the sun rose. Two people who'd started as strangers holding on to each other while a little girl with a broken heart slept between them. The hospital was a cathedral of modern medicine, all glass walls and hushed efficiency, and people in scrubs moving with purpose. Mason had been in hospitals before, too many times, but always in the waiting rooms of public facilities, watching numbers tick down on government-issued machines while insurance claims piled up like accusations. This was different. This was money. Ellie had her own prep room, bigger than his old apartment, with windows overlooking a garden designed specifically to soothe anxious families. A team of nurses attended to her with the kind of focused attention that came from knowing who was paying the bills. And Dr. Okonkwo, the cardiac surgeon Vivian had flown in from Johns Hopkins, explained the procedure with a confidence that was almost supernatural. "We're repairing the ventricular septal defect using a minimally invasive approach," he said, his voice calm and measured. "We'll go in through a small incision between the ribs, patch the hole, and have her out of surgery in approximately 4 hours. Recovery time is typically 2 to 3 weeks, with full activity resumption in 6 to 8. "And the risks?" Mason asked. Dr. Okonkwo's expression didn't waver. "There are always risks with cardiac surgery, Mr. Hale. Bleeding, infection, adverse reaction to anesthesia. But your daughter is young, otherwise healthy, and in the best possible hands. I've performed this procedure over 300 times with a success rate well above the national average." Mason nodded, but the numbers blurred. Statistics meant nothing when it was your child on the table. Vivian stood beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her shoulder against his. She hadn't left his side since they'd arrived, hadn't taken a single business call, hadn't even checked her phone. "When can we see her?" she asked. "Before they take her in?" Dr. Okonkwo gestured toward the prep room. "She's being prepped now. You have about 20 minutes. 20 minutes. 20 minutes to say everything that mattered. 20 minutes that might be the last." Mason pushed through the door before the thought could finish forming. Ellie was sitting up in bed, dwarfed by the hospital gown and the machines surrounding her, but her smile was as bright as ever. Mr. Trunks was clutched against her chest, and she'd somehow convinced a nurse to let her wear the elephant's matching bow in her hair. "Daddy!" She held out her arms, and Mason crossed the room in 3 strides, gathering her against him as carefully as he could without disturbing the monitors. "They said I'm going to take a really long nap, and when I wake up, my heart will work better." "That's right, Bug." Mason's voice was thick. "The doctors are going to fix you up good as new." "Will it hurt?" "No, baby. You won't feel a thing." Ellie nodded solemnly, then peered around his shoulder. "Is the lady here?" Vivian stepped forward from the doorway, and something in her expression made Mason's heart stutter. She looked terrified, completely, utterly terrified, in a way he'd never seen before. "I'm here, Ellie." "Good." Ellie reached out one small hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Vivian took it. "I want you to hold Daddy's hand while I'm sleeping. He gets scared when I'm at the hospital." Vivian's voice caught. "I can do that." "Promise?" "I promise." Ellie smiled, satisfied. Then she looked between them with an expression far too knowing for a 5-year-old. "You're supposed to be married, right? That's what the people on TV said. Mrs. Cross and her new husband." Mason and Vivian exchanged a glance. "That's right, Bug." "Then you should hold hands even when I'm not sleeping." Ellie's tone was matter-of-fact, the way children's tones always were when stating obvious truths. Married people hold hands, that's the rule. "Is it?" Vivian asked, something warming in her voice despite the fear. "Mommy and Daddy used to hold hands all the time." Ellie's grip on Vivian's fingers tightened. "Before Mommy went to heaven, I remember." The air in the room went still. Mason felt the words land like physical blows. Sarah's hands, Sarah's warmth, Sarah's love, lost to cancer and time, but not to memory. His daughter remembered. "Your mommy sounds like she was very smart," Vivian said softly. "She was." Ellie nodded. "And pretty, and she always smelled like flowers." A pause. "You smell like flowers too sometimes. The white ones in the garden." Vivian's composure cracked. A single tear escaped, sliding down her cheek before she could stop it. "Jasmine," she whispered. "It was my mother's favorite." "Maybe they're friends," Ellie said. "Your mommy and my mommy. In heaven. Maybe they talk about us." Mason couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. But Vivian who never cried, who never broke, who never let anyone see behind the mask. Vivian knelt beside the hospital bed and pressed her forehead against Ellie's small hand. "Maybe they do," she said, her voice breaking. "Maybe they're watching right now, making sure you're brave." "I'm brave," Ellie confirmed. "Daddy says I'm the bravest girl in the whole world." "He's right." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "We're ready for her. Dr. Okonkwo is waiting." The next 5 minutes were a blur of final kisses and whispered promises, and Mason's heart shattering into pieces he wasn't sure could ever be reassembled. He watched them wheel his daughter away. Mr. Trunks clutched in her arms, and he didn't realize he was shaking until Vivian's hand found his, cool and dry. But this time, it was shaking too. The waiting room was designed for comfort, but comfort was impossible when your child's heart was open on a table. Mason sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than his old couch, staring at a wall of windows that overlooked the hospital garden. The sun was bright, birds were singing. The world continued as if nothing was happening, as if the universe didn't care that his entire existence was balanced on a knife's edge. Vivian sat beside him. She hadn't let go of his hand since they'd left the prep room. Her fingers were still laced through his, and every so often she squeezed, like she was checking that he was still there. Still breathing, still holding on. "I should make some calls," she said at one point, but she didn't move. "You should," Mason agreed, but he didn't let go. An hour passed. 2. The clock on the wall ticked with the precision of a metronome, each second stretching into eternity. "Tell me about her mother," Vivian said suddenly. Mason looked at her. "What?" "Sarah, Ellie's mother, your wife." Vivian's gaze was steady, but something vulnerable lurked beneath. "Tell me about her." It was an unexpected request, an intimate one. The kind of question that cracked open doors Mason had kept carefully sealed for years. But somehow, with Vivian's hand in his and his daughter's life in a stranger's hands, it didn't feel invasive. It felt necessary. She was a kindergarten teacher, Mason said slowly, in a public school in Van Nuys. Made nothing, gave everything. The kind of person who kept snacks in her desk for kids whose parents couldn't afford breakfast. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I met her at a hardware store, of all places. She was trying to buy parts for a broken toilet, and she had absolutely no idea what she was doing. So you helped her. I fixed her toilet, then I fixed her kitchen faucet, then her garbage disposal. Mason shook his head. I kept finding reasons to come back. And she kept finding things that needed fixing. Took us 3 months to admit we were just making excuses to see each other. How long were you married? 3 years, would have been 4, but the words stuck in his throat. She got sick. Started with a backache that wouldn't go away. By the time they found it, it was everywhere. Vivian's grip tightened. I'm sorry. She lived 6 months after the diagnosis, 6 months of hospitals and treatments and watching her disappear piece by piece. Mason's voice dropped to a whisper. Ellie was 2. She doesn't remember much, just fragments. Sarah's voice, the way she laughed, the smell of flowers. She remembered, Vivian said quietly. In the prep room. She remembered holding hands. Kids remember what matters. Mason turned to look at her, even when they're too young to understand why. Silence fell between them, but it was a comfortable silence. The kind that came from shared grief, shared understanding, the recognition that loss was a language all its own. My mother died when I was 12, Vivian said suddenly. Cancer, too. Different kind, but the same ending. She stared at their joined hands. My father, he never recovered. Threw himself into work, built an empire, forgot he had a daughter. Is that why you are the way you are? Vivian's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. What way is that? Armored. Mason chose the word carefully, like you're expecting an attack from every direction. Because I am. Vivian's jaw tightened. The board, the investors, the competitors, the press. Everyone wants something. Everyone's angling for position. And if you show weakness, any weakness, they tear you apart. Sounds exhausting. It is. She paused. It was. Before. Before what? Vivian turned to face him, and her eyes were unguarded in a way he'd never seen. Raw and honest and completely vulnerable. Before a stranger in a parking lot looked at me like I was human, she said. Before a little girl with a broken heart decided I was worth drawing. Before I walked into a purple bedroom and remembered what it felt like to matter to someone. Not because of my money or my power or what I could do for them. Just because. Mason's breath caught. Vivian, I don't know what this is. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know what we're doing or where it's going. The contract says we're strangers who share an address. But you don't feel like a stranger, Mason. Not anymore. And I don't know what to do with that. He lifted their joined hands, studying the way his fingers looked wrapped around hers, calloused against smooth. Working class against wealth. 2 people who never should have crossed paths, bound together by desperation and paperwork. Maybe we don't have to know, he said. Maybe we just have to see what happens. Before she could respond, the door opened. Dr. Okonkwo appeared, still in his surgical scrubs, and Mason's heart stopped. The surgeon smiled. The surgery was successful. Ellie's in recovery, and she's asking for Mr. Trunks. Mason's legs gave out. He sank back into the chair, his whole body trembling, and the sob that escaped him was primal, raw, the sound of a man who'd been holding his breath for years finally being allowed to exhale. Vivian caught him before he could collapse completely, her arms wrapped around him, pulling him close, and for once there was no distance, no contract, no pretense, just 2 people holding each other while the world righted itself. She's okay, Vivian whispered against his hair. She's okay. She's okay. Mason clung to her like a drowning man, and for the first time since Sarah died, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. Ellie's recovery room was painted the same shade of purple as her bedroom at home, and Mason was certain Vivian had something to do with that. His daughter was propped up in bed, groggy from anesthesia, but awake, Mr. Trunks tucked securely under her arm. "Daddy," she mumbled when he rushed to her side. "They put stickers on my chest. Star stickers. To hear my heart. I know, Bug." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her nose, every part of her face he could reach. "The doctor said you were so brave. The bravest girl they ever saw. I told them I had practice." Ellie's eyes found Vivian hovering in the doorway. "The lady promised to hold your hand. Did she?" Vivian stepped forward, and her voice was thick when she answered. "I did. The whole time." "Good." Ellie's eyelids drooped. "Married people hold hands. That's the rule." She was asleep before anyone could respond. Mason stayed by her bed until the nurses gently suggested he get some rest. Vivian arranged for a private suite adjacent to Ellie's room, the kind of accommodation that didn't exist in normal hospitals. And when Mason protested, she simply said, "I'm not asking, I'm telling." He was too exhausted to argue. The suite had a couch that was more comfortable than his old bed, and a bathroom with a shower that used water pressure he'd only dreamed about. He stood under the spray for 20 minutes, letting the heat pound against his shoulders, washing away the tension and terror of the past 24 hours. When he emerged, Vivian was sitting on the couch, shoes off, legs tucked beneath her. She'd changed out of her corporate armor into something softer, a cashmere sweater and slacks that made her look almost approachable, almost human. "I ordered dinner," she said. "Hospital food is acceptable, but you need something real." "You don't have to take care of me." "No," she agreed, "but I want to." The words hung between them. Mason sat on the opposite end of the couch, maintaining the distance that had become their default. But somehow, in the dim light of the hospital suite, with his daughter sleeping safely in the next room, the distance felt smaller, less intentional. "What happens now?" he asked. Vivian considered the question. "Ellie recovers, 2 weeks in the hospital, then home care for another month. Physical therapy, follow-up appointments, the best specialists money can buy." "I meant with us." Her gaze sharpened. "The contract." "I'm not asking about the contract." Mason leaned forward. "I'm asking what happens with us. You and me. This thing that isn't supposed to exist but keeps existing anyway." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "I've spent my entire adult life building walls, controlling every variable, eliminating risk." She looked down at her hands, still elegant, still ringless despite the legal wedding band sitting in a jewelry box somewhere. "You're a risk, Mason. Everything about you is a risk." "Is that a problem?" "It should be." "But?" Her eyes lifted to meet his. "But when you look at me," she said slowly, "I don't want to run. I don't want to calculate the angles or prepare for betrayal. I just want to stay. In whatever this is, for however long it lasts." Mason felt the words land somewhere deep in his chest. This woman who'd spent her life building empires and fortresses, admitting that she wanted to stay. With him, with them. "The contract ends in 2.5 years, he said. "I know." "And then?" Vivian's lips curved in something that was almost a smile. "Then we negotiate new terms." It wasn't a declaration, wasn't a promise, but from a woman who spoke in contracts and clauses, it was everything. Mason closed the distance between them. He moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat, to rebuild her walls, to push him away. She didn't. She watched him approach with those storm-gray eyes, and when he sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth, she didn't pull back. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask anything." "Why did you really marry me?" "The full truth. Not the business reason, not the board protection, the reason you don't say out loud." Vivian's composure flickered. "Because I saw you fall apart," she whispered, "in that parking lot. I watched you break, and then I watched you put yourself back together. Not for yourself, for her. For that little girl who needed you to be strong." Her voice cracked. "And I thought, if someone could love that completely, that selflessly, then maybe they could teach me how." "You don't need teaching." "I need something." She looked at him, and her walls were completely gone. "I've been empty for so long, Mason. filling the void with work and power and money, pretending it was enough. But it wasn't. It never was. And then you walked into my office in your borrowed tie, your scuffed work boots, and you looked at me like I was just a person. And I thought, maybe that's what I've been missing. Mason reached out. His hand cupped her face, tilting it toward him, and she leaned into the touch like she'd been starving for it. You're not empty, he said softly. You're scared. There's a difference. What if I'm both? Then we're scared together. His thumb traced her cheekbone. That's what partners do. Vivian's breath hitched. We're not supposed to be partners, she said, but the words had no weight. The contract? Forget the contract. Mason leaned closer. Just for tonight. Just for this moment. What do you want, Vivian? Not what's safe, not what's calculated. What do you actually want? Her eyes searched his face, and then she answered, not with words. She closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, uncertain, two people learning a language they'd forgotten how to speak. But then something shifted, deepened. Mason's hand slid into her hair, pulling her closer, and Vivian's fingers gripped his shirt like she was afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. That wasn't in the contract, Vivian whispered. No, Mason agreed. It wasn't. What happens now? He rested his forehead against hers, feeling her pulse race beneath his fingertips. Now we figure it out together. And in the hospital room next door, a little girl with a mended heart slept peacefully, dreaming of purple rooms and white flowers and two people who were learning, day by day, what it meant to become a family. The weeks that followed were a study in transformation. Ellie recovered with the resilience only children possess, her energy returning in increments that made Mason's heart swell each day. First it was sitting up without assistance, then standing, then walking laps around the hospital floor, Mr. Trunks tucked under one arm, while nurses cheered her progress. And through it all, Vivian was there. Not constantly, not obviously, but unmistakably present in ways she never had been before. Her work schedule shifted to accommodate hospital visits. Her evening calls with the board were punctuated by trips to Ellie's room, where she'd read stories or play cards or simply sit in the corner, watching and learning what it meant to be part of something bigger than herself. Mason watched the Ice Queen thaw in real time, and it was beautiful. She's asking for you again, he told Vivian one evening, finding her in the hallway outside Ellie's room. Wants you to do the voices tonight. Says you do the dragon better than me. Vivian's lips curved. I've been practicing. I noticed. They stood together in the fluorescent light, closer than the contract technically allowed, and neither of them mentioned the distance that was supposed to exist between them. The doctors say she can go home next week, Vivian said. I know. And then things go back to normal. Mason considered the word. Normal. What did that even mean anymore? The mansion that had felt like a museum now felt like home. The woman who had been a stranger now felt like something he couldn't quite name. I don't think normal exists, he said. Not for us, not anymore. Vivian turned to face him, and in the dim hallway light, she looked almost fragile. What exists then? Mason reached for her hand, cool and dry, but she didn't pull away. This, he said simply, whatever this is. We figure it out as we go. Vivian's fingers tightened around his. Together? He lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Together. And in the room behind them, a little girl with a healing heart smiled in her sleep, dreaming of purple rooms and bedtime stories and the family she was building, one day at a time. The mansion felt different when they brought Ellie home. Mason noticed it the moment they crossed the threshold, his daughter's hand clutched in his while Vivian directed the medical staff carrying equipment behind them. The marble floors still gleamed, the ceiling still soared impossibly high. The furniture still looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the purple balloons floating in the foyer, tied to the banister by ribbons that matched Ellie's room. Maybe it was the banner stretched across the living room entrance, hand-painted in wobbly letters that could only belong to Margaret the housekeeper, reading, "Welcome home, Ellie," in every color of the rainbow. Maybe it was the smell of fresh-baked cookies drifting from the kitchen, warm and sweet and utterly at odds with the sterile perfection that usually defined this space. Or maybe it was the way Vivian's hand found Mason's as they watched Ellie's face light up, and neither of them pulled away. "They did all this?" Ellie breathed, her eyes huge as she took in the decorations. "For me?" "For you, Bug." Mason's voice was thick. "Everyone wanted you to feel special coming home." "I do feel special." She turned to Vivian with an expression of such pure gratitude that even the Ice Queen couldn't maintain her composure. "Did you do the balloons? They're my favorite color." "I may have made a suggestion." Vivian cleared her throat. "Margaret executed the vision." Ellie released Mason's hand and crossed the foyer with the careful steps of a child still learning to trust her mended heart. She stopped in front of Vivian, studying her with the intense focus only 5-year-olds could muster. Then she wrapped her arms around Vivian's legs. "Thank you," she whispered against the expensive fabric of Vivian's dress, "for making it pretty, for holding Daddy's hand, for everything." Mason watched Vivian freeze, watched the uncertainty flicker across her face, watched her hands hover above Ellie's shoulders like she wasn't sure she had permission to touch. Then something broke loose. Vivian knelt down, heedless of her designer dress pooling on the marble floor, and gathered Ellie into her arms. The hug was awkward, unpracticed, the embrace of a woman who'd forgotten how bodies were supposed to work. But it was real. And when she pulled back, her eyes were glistening. "You're welcome, Ellie," she said softly. "Welcome home." The first month of recovery established new rhythms. Mason had expected things to return to their previous pattern: the polite distance, the cold hallways, the ghost-like existence of two people sharing an address, but nothing more. Instead, he found himself navigating territory that had no map. Vivian still worked impossible hours, but now she came home for dinner. Not every night, but most nights, she appeared in the kitchen doorway around 7, still in her corporate armor, but willing to shed it at the table. She'd sit across from Mason and Ellie, picking at food she barely tasted, but listening, always listening to the stories of Ellie's day. "We learned about butterflies today," Ellie announced one evening, waving her fork for emphasis. "Did you know they start as caterpillars, and then they make a cocoon and everything turns to soup inside?" "Soup?" Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Real soup. Miss Patterson said all their guts become liquid, and then they rebuild themselves into something new." Ellie's face scrunched in thought. "Do you think it hurts? Becoming soup?" "I think—" Vivian paused, something flickering behind her eyes. "I think transformation is always difficult, but maybe it's worth it if what you become is beautiful." Mason felt the words land somewhere deep in his chest. He wondered if Vivian knew she was describing herself, the cocoon she'd built from contracts and coldness finally beginning to crack. "I want to be a butterfly," Ellie decided. "A purple one, with sparkles." "I don't think butterflies have sparkles, Bug. They should." Ellie turned to Vivian with the supreme confidence of childhood. "You could make butterflies with sparkles, right? You can do anything." Vivian's composure flickered. "I don't think that's how it works." "But you're in charge of everything. Daddy says you're the boss of like 1,000,000 people." "Not quite 1,000,000. But a lot?" "A lot," Vivian conceded. "Then you should tell them to make sparkle butterflies." Ellie nodded decisively. "It would make people happy." Mason bit back a laugh at the expression on Vivian's face, something between amusement and genuine consideration, as if she were actually contemplating adding sparkle butterflies to the next quarter's strategic initiatives. "I'll take it under advisement," she said finally. "What's advisement?" "It means she'll think about it," Mason translated. "Oh." Ellie returned to her dinner, satisfied. "Good. Thinking is important. That's what Ms. Patterson says." The evening settled into comfortable silence after that, punctuated by the clink of silverware and Ellie's occasional commentary on topics ranging from the unfairness of nap time to the superior qualities of purple over all other colors. When dinner ended and Mason started clearing plates, Vivian rose to help, a gesture so unexpected that he nearly dropped a glass. "You don't have to do that." "I know." She reached past him to stack dishes in the sink. I want to. Their shoulders brushed. Neither of them moved away. She's adjusting well, Vivian said quietly, glancing toward the living room where Ellie had retreated with her crayons. Dr. Okonkwo's last report was excellent. She's a fighter. Mason watched his daughter through the doorway, her small form hunched over a drawing, tongue poking out in concentration. Always has been. She gets it from you. The words were simple, but they landed with weight. Mason turned to face Vivian, finding her closer than he'd expected. Close enough to see the faint lines around her eyes, the vulnerability she still worked so hard to hide. What about you? He asked. Are you adjusting? Vivian's jaw tightened. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. He leaned against the counter, giving her space while refusing to let her escape the question. Something changed in that hospital, for both of us. And now we're back here, in this house full of empty rooms, trying to figure out what any of it means. The contract. I'm not talking about the contract. His voice softened. I'm talking about you, Vivian, the real you. The one who stayed by my side for 8 hours while my daughter's heart was open on a table. The one who reads bedtime stories and decorates with purple balloons and looks at me sometimes like you're waiting for me to disappear. Vivian's breath caught. I'm not good at this, she said finally. At feeling things. At letting people close. Every time I've tried, it's ended badly. People want things from me. They always want things. What do you think I want? She studied him, those storm gray eyes searching his face for the catch, the angle, the inevitable betrayal. I don't know, she admitted. That's what terrifies me. Mason reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining the way Ellie had instructed. I want you to be happy, he said simply. That's it. That's the whole list. Vivian's composure cracked. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't a flood of tears or a collapse into his arms. It was subtler than that, a tremor in her breathing, a slight softening of the tension she carried in her shoulders. She looked down at their joined hands, studying the contrast of his calluses against her manicured fingers. I don't know how, she whispered, to be happy. I don't think I ever learned. Then maybe we can figure it out together. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You keep saying that, together. Because I mean it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stepped closer, closing the distance between them until Mason could feel the warmth of her body, could count the faint freckles scattered across her nose. The gala is next week, she said, and the non sequitur was so jarring that Mason blinked. The what? The Cross Industries Charity Gala. Black tie, 500 guests, every board member and investor we have. She paused. I need you there, as my husband. That's in the contract. I know. Her grip on his hand tightened. But I'm not asking because of the contract. I'm asking because I don't want to face those sharks alone. I'm asking because when you're beside me, I feel like I can breathe. Mason's heart stuttered. Vivian, I know it's not in the terms. I know you didn't sign up for this, but I'm asking anyway. She met his eyes, and he saw fear there, raw and honest and completely unhidden. Will you stand beside me? Not as a prop, as whatever we are, whatever we're becoming. He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. I'll be there. The relief that flooded her face was almost painful to witness. Thank you, she breathed. You don't have to thank me. He released her hand, but only to cup her face, tilting it toward him. We're in this together, remember? That's the deal. That's not the deal we signed. Then maybe we need a new deal. He leaned in, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. The kiss was gentler this time, slower, a conversation rather than a confession. When they broke apart, Vivian's eyes were closed, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked at peace. Daddy, I need more purple! Ellie's voice shattered the moment, and they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Duty calls, Mason said, but he was smiling. Vivian's lips curved in response. Go, I need to make some calls anyway. She retreated toward her study, heels clicking against marble, but at the doorway she paused and looked back. Mason? Yeah? I'm glad you signed the contract. Then she was gone. and Mason was left standing in the kitchen with a heart that felt too full for his chest and a daughter who was yelling about purple crayons. Just another evening in his strange new life. The gala arrived with the force of a hurricane. Mason had attended exactly one black tie event in his life, a wedding where he'd been the best man and had spent the entire evening tugging at a rental tux that didn't quite fit. This was different. This was tailored suits delivered to the mansion by nervous assistants, fittings that took hours, accessories that cost more than his old truck. This was Vivian's world, and he was about to walk into it beside her. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," Vivian observed, appearing in his doorway as he struggled with his cufflinks. She was already dressed, and the sight of her stole his breath. The gown was midnight blue, almost black, but when she moved, it shifted into something deeper, richer, like the ocean at night. Her hair was down for once, cascading over her shoulders in waves that softened the sharp edges of her face. Diamonds glittered at her ears, her wrists, her throat. She looked like a queen, and she was looking at him. "That bad?" Mason managed, gesturing at his still unfastened cuffs. Vivian crossed the room with practiced grace, and he tried not to notice how close she stood as she took his wrist. Her fingers were cool against his pulse point as she fastened the cufflinks. "Not bad," she said softly. "Just different. You don't belong in this world. Is that a problem?" "No." She looked up at him, and something raw flickered in her eyes. "It's a relief. Everyone in that ballroom tonight will be performing, playing angles, looking for weaknesses. You'll be the only real thing in the room." "Vivian, I meant it as a compliment." She finished with the cufflinks and stepped back, surveying him with a critical eye. "You clean up well, Mr. Hale." "So do you, Mrs. Cross." The name landed differently now, heavier, more real. "Ellie's settled with Margaret," Vivian said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his lapel. "She made me promise to take pictures of us being fancy," her words. "We should probably do that then." "Probably." Neither of them moved. The air between them thickened with something unspoken, something that had been building for weeks, maybe longer. Mason was acutely aware of her hand on his chest, the heat of her palm through his shirt. "We should go," Vivian said, but she didn't pull away. "We should. The car is waiting." "I know." Her eyes searched his face. "Why aren't we moving?" Mason covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his heartbeat. "Because I need you to know something, before we walk into that room and pretend for 500 strangers." He paused, making sure she was listening. "This isn't pretend for me anymore. I don't know when it stopped being pretend, but it did. And if that's too much, if you need me to keep the walls up, I will. But I won't lie to you about what I feel. Not anymore." Vivian's breath caught. "Mason, you don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know." She was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly she rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek, lingering just long enough to make his pulse stutter. "I know," she whispered against his skin. "I've known for a while." Before he could respond, she stepped back, smoothing her gown and lifting her chin. "Now, shall we go terrify some board members?" Mason offered his arm with a formality that made her smile. "Lead the way, Mrs. Cross." The ballroom was a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers dripped from ceilings that soared 40 feet overhead. Tables draped in white linen held centerpieces that cost more than most people's monthly rent. A live orchestra played from a raised platform, their music floating over the hum of 1,000 conversations and clinking glasses. And everywhere, people. Beautiful people. Powerful people. People whose names appeared on buildings and stock tickers and hospital wings. They circulated through the space like sharks in formal wear, each conversation a negotiation, each smile a calculation. Mason had never felt more out of place in his life, but Vivian's hand was in his, and she wasn't letting go. "Breathe," she murmured as they descended the grand staircase, every eye in the room turning toward them. "They can smell fear." "Comforting." "I never promised comfort." Her grip tightened. "I promised honesty." They reached the bottom of the stairs and the circling began. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in survival. Mason watched Vivian navigate conversation after conversation, each one a battlefield disguised as small talk. Board members who smiled while their eyes calculated her weaknesses. Investors who praised her leadership while angling for concessions. Competitors who offered congratulations that dripped with barely concealed contempt. And through it all, she never faltered. She introduced Mason with a warmth that would have seemed genuine to anyone who didn't know her. Stories about how they met, carefully crafted to obscure the truth while feeling authentic. She touched his arm at just the right moments, leaned into him when cameras flashed, played the role of devoted wife with the precision of a woman who'd spent her life performing. But Mason noticed the cracks. The way her smile didn't reach her eyes when certain people approached. The slight tension in her shoulders when a silver-haired man named Harrison spoke too close to her ear. The almost imperceptible flinch when someone mentioned her father's legacy. "You're doing amazing," he whispered during a rare moment alone by the bar. "I'm surviving." She took a glass of champagne but didn't drink. "There's a difference." "What do you need?" For this night to be over. She scanned the room with eyes that missed nothing. 3 more hours, then we can go home. Home. The word landed differently now. "I can distract anyone you need me to," Mason offered. "Drop a tray, spill a drink, fake a medical emergency." The ghost of a genuine smile crossed her face. "Tempting, but I need you for something else." "Name it." "Dance with me." Mason blinked. "What?" "Dance." She set down her untouched champagne and held out her hand. "The orchestra is playing, the floor is open, and my husband should probably be seen dancing with me at least once." "Vivian, I don't know how to—" "I'll teach you." Her eyes held his. "Please, I need something real right now, even if it's just a dance." How could he say no to that? The dance floor was less crowded than Mason had expected, and he realized with a start that it was because everyone had stopped to watch them. The CEO and her mysterious husband, the love story that had captivated the tabloids finally on display. "Ignore them," Vivian murmured, positioning his hands with practiced ease. "Just look at me." "That won't be hard." She smiled at that, a real smile, and then the orchestra swelled and they were moving. Mason had no idea what he was doing. His feet stumbled over rhythms he couldn't hear, his arms felt stiff and awkward, and he was certain every person in the room was watching him make a fool of himself. But Vivian didn't let him fall. She guided him through the steps with a patience he hadn't known she possessed, covering his mistakes with graceful adjustments, making his stumbles look intentional. And somewhere in the middle of the second song, something clicked. He stopped thinking about the steps, started thinking about her, the way she fit against him, closer than she'd ever been, the warmth of her hand in his, the scent of jasmine that clung to her hair, the same perfume she'd worn in the hospital, the same perfume she'd worn the day they met. "You're not bad," she said softly. "I'm terrible." "Okay, you're terrible, but you're trying." Her eyes sparkled. "That counts for something." "What does it count for?" She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Everything." The song ended, but they didn't pull apart. For a long moment, they stood in the center of the dance floor, the world around them fading into irrelevance. "Vivian, well, isn't this sweet?" The voice cut through the moment like a blade. Mason felt Vivian stiffen in his arms before he even registered the speaker, a tall man with silver temples and a smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. He was handsome in a predatory way, the kind of handsome that came from expensive surgeons and careful grooming. "Richard," Vivian's voice could have frozen champagne. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm on the guest list, darling. I'm always on the guest list." The man, Richard, turned his attention to Mason with a look of calculated assessment. "And this must be the husband, the construction worker, isn't it? How quaint." Mason felt his spine straighten. "Handyman, actually. I fix things." "I'm sure you do." Richard's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Though some things I'm afraid can't be fixed. Isn't that right, Vivian?" Vivian's hand tightened on Mason's arm. "Richard was just leaving." "Was I? I don't recall." Richard stepped closer, invading their space with the confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything. "I was hoping we could catch up, for old time's sake." There are no old times, Richard. There never were. That's not what I remember. His voice dropped and something ugly crept into his tone. I remember quite a lot, actually. Long nights in your office, private dinners, the way you looked at me when you thought no one was watching. Mason felt his blood begin to boil. The lady said you were leaving, he said quietly. Richard's gaze snapped to him, and the mask of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. The lady can speak for herself. She always has. Though I wonder... He leaned in, close enough that Mason could smell whiskey on his breath. Does she speak for herself with you? Or do you just do what you're told? A trained monkey in a rented suit. This suit was tailored, Mason said mildly. And I don't think I'm the one who's trained here. Something dangerous flickered in Richard's eyes. You don't know what you're dealing with, boy. This world, these people, this woman. He gestured dismissively at the ballroom. You're a novelty, a toy. And when she gets tired of playing with you, you'll be thrown away like all the others. Richard. Vivian's voice had gone deadly calm, the voice of a CEO about to destroy someone. Walk away, now, before I decide to share some interesting stories with our mutual friends. Stories about your creative accounting practices, your offshore accounts, your recent conversations with our competitors. Richard's face paled. You wouldn't. Try me. The standoff lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then Richard's composure cracked, and he stepped back with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. This isn't over, Vivian. You know it isn't. Yes, it is. She turned her back on him, a deliberate dismissal that said more than words ever could. Goodbye, Richard. Mason watched the man retreat into the crowd, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the ugliness beneath. Who was that? He asked when they were alone again. Vivian's mask had slipped back into place, but he could see the tremor in her hands. No one important. That didn't look like no one. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she met his eyes. He was a mistake. One I made 3 years ago, when I was lonely and stupid and desperate for someone to see me as something other than a bank account. Her voice was flat, reciting facts rather than reliving them. It lasted 6 months. He wanted access to the company, the board, my father's contacts. When I figured out what he was really after, I ended it. He didn't take it well. I gathered. He's been trying to destroy me ever since. Quietly, of course. Rumors, undermining, whisper campaigns about my stability, my judgment. She paused. He's the one who convinced half the board that I needed a husband to be taken seriously. Mason processed this. So when you came looking for a husband, I was playing his game, beating him at it. Her jaw tightened. He wanted me vulnerable. I gave him exactly what he asked for, in a way he never expected. Me. You. She looked at him, and something softened in her expression. The one thing he couldn't predict. The one thing he can't corrupt. Mason reached for her hand. I won't let him hurt you, he said quietly. Or Ellie. Whatever game he's playing, whatever he tries next, I'm here. Vivian's composure cracked, just for a moment. Just long enough for him to see the fear she'd been hiding, the exhaustion of years spent fighting alone. I believe you, she whispered, and that terrifies me more than anything Richard could ever do. Why? Because the last time I believed someone like this, they destroyed everything. Mason stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of her body. I'm not him. I'm not any of them. I know. Her voice broke on the words. That's why I'm terrified. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Mason stayed by Vivian's side through every handshake, every photograph, every calculated conversation. He watched her rebuild her armor piece by piece, transforming back into the Ice Queen the world expected. But now he could see the seams. The places where the mask didn't quite fit. The moments when the woman underneath broke through. When they finally escaped into the waiting car, Vivian collapsed against the leather seat with exhaustion so profound it made his chest ache. You did it, he said softly. We did it. She turned her head to look at him, and her eyes were red-rimmed with held-back tears. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. You've been doing it alone for years. That's not the same as doing it well. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. Tonight was different. Having someone in my corner, someone who actually cares what happens to me. Vivian, don't. She pressed a finger to his lips. Don't tell me I'm being dramatic or that anyone would have done it. You did it. You stood beside me in a room full of people who want me destroyed, and you made me feel like I could breathe. He kissed her finger, then pulled it away so he could speak. I'll do it again. As many times as you need. The contract ends in 2 years. Then we'll write a new one. She studied him in the darkness of the car, streetlights flashing across her face. You really mean that, don't you? I really do. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned across the seat and kissed him, soft and slow, tasting of champagne and something that might have been hope. Take me home, she whispered against his lips. Home? Home. And for the first time since he'd signed that contract, Mason understood exactly what she meant. The weeks after the gala brought a fragile peace. Richard's appearance had rattled Vivian in ways she wouldn't fully admit, but Mason saw the signs. The extra security she'd arranged without telling him. The background checks on new staff. The way she tensed every time an unfamiliar car appeared in the driveway. But there were good signs too. Better signs. Ellie's recovery continued to exceed every expectation, her energy returning in full force. She'd started calling Vivian by her name now, not the lady, and the change seemed to mean something to both of them. They developed routines, rituals, the small intimacies of a family learning to exist together. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon walks in the garden, Wednesday movie nights where Ellie got to choose and invariably picked something animated and impossibly loud. And through it all, Mason and Vivian circled each other like dancers learning new steps. They kissed now, sometimes, when Ellie wasn't watching. Brief touches that meant more than they should. A hand on the small of her back as they passed in the hallway. A brush of fingers across the breakfast table. Nothing more. The contract was still there, an invisible wall between them, and neither of them seemed ready to breach it completely. Until Ellie's routine checkup brought news that changed everything. Dr. Okonkwo's office was warm and welcoming, filled with children's artwork and soft music designed to soothe anxious parents. Mason sat in one of the oversized chairs, Ellie on his lap, while Vivian occupied the seat beside them, close enough that their shoulders touched. It had become natural now, the closeness, the contact. I have good news and better news, Dr. Okonkwo said, smiling as he reviewed Ellie's chart. The good news is that her heart is functioning beautifully. The repair is held, and there's no sign of any complications. And the better news, Wolchas? Mason asked. The better news is that she's cleared for full activity. No more restrictions. Swimming, running, climbing trees, whatever she wants. Dr. Okonkwo turned to Ellie. You, young lady, have an excellent heart. Ellie's face lit up. Can I do gymnastics? Sophie from school does gymnastics, and she can do a cartwheel. You can do whatever you want. Mason felt the tension he'd been carrying for months finally begin to release. His daughter was healthy. His daughter was whole. His daughter was going to be okay. He turned to share the moment with Vivian and found her already looking at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She's okay, he breathed. She's okay. Vivian's voice cracked. She's really okay. And then without thinking, without calculation, without any regard for the contract or the walls or the careful distance they'd maintained, Vivian leaned over and kissed him. Not on the cheek, not a brush of lips. A real kiss, deep and desperate. The kiss of a woman who'd been holding back for too long and couldn't hold back anymore. Ellie giggled. Daddy and Vivian are kissing. That means they love each other. They broke apart, breathing hard, and Mason saw the exact moment Vivian realized what she'd done. The panic that flickered across her face, the instinct to retreat, to rebuild, to hide. He caught her hand before she could pull away. She's right, you know, he said quietly. Vivian's breath caught. What? She's right. He held her gaze. I love you, Vivian. I've loved you for months. I've been too scared to say it, too worried about what it would mean for the contract, for Ellie, for everything. But I'm done being scared. Vivian's composure shattered. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. Her hand trembled in his. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be loved. I don't know how to trust it. Every time I've tried, I know." He lifted their joined hands to his lips. "But you're not alone this time. We'll figure it out together." There's that word again. It's become my favorite. Ellie squirmed off his lap and threw her arms around both of them, a group hug that was messy and awkward and absolutely perfect. "Are we a family now?" she asked. "A real family?" Mason looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Mason. And in that moment, in a doctor's office surrounded by children's drawings and the steady beep of medical equipment, something fundamental shifted. "Yeah, Bug," Mason said softly. "I think we are." But even as the words left his mouth, he couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over. That somewhere out there, Richard was planning his next move, and that the fragile peace they'd built was about to be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. The storm Mason had been sensing broke 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon that started like any other. He was in the garden, helping Ellie build what she called a fairy castle out of sticks and flowers, when his phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Just 2 words. "Come inside." Something in those words made his stomach drop. "Stay here with Margaret, Bug," he said, brushing dirt from his knees. "I need to go talk to Vivian." "Is something wrong?" Ellie's face creased with worry, and Mason realized that his daughter had learned to read the weather of this household better than anyone. "I don't know yet, but whatever it is, we'll handle it." He found Vivian in her study, standing before the window with her back to the door. The rigid set of her shoulders told him everything he needed to know before she spoke. "Close the door," she said without turning around. Mason did. "What's happened?" Vivian turned and her face was pale, controlled but pale, with the kind of fear that ran deeper than ordinary problems. "Richard?" She spat the name like poison. "He sold the story." "What story?" She crossed to her desk and picked up a tablet, thrusting it toward him. The screen showed a tabloid website, the headline screaming in bold letters that made Mason's blood run cold. "Cross Heiress's marriage, a fake. Contract reveals 3-year business deal, sources. Say." Mason's hands went numb. "How?" he managed. "Someone in my legal department." Vivian's voice was flat, but he could hear the tremor underneath. "Richard's been cultivating them for months. Dinners, gifts, promises of a future position. They copied the contract, every page, every term." Mason scrolled through the article, his horror growing with each paragraph. They had everything: the financial terms, the separate bedrooms clause, the explicit prohibition against physical intimacy, even the part about Ellie's medical coverage, twisted to sound like Vivian had bought a child's affection along with a husband. "This is..." He couldn't find the words. "Career ending," Vivian finished, "if the board believes it. And they will believe it, because Richard's already been in their ears for years." She sank into her chair, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked defeated. Not angry or determined or coldly furious, just broken. Mason set down the tablet and moved around the desk, kneeling beside her chair the way he'd knelt beside Ellie's hospital bed. His hands found hers, and she gripped them like a lifeline. "What do we do?" "I don't know." Her voice cracked. "I've spent my entire adult life preparing for every possible attack, and I never saw this one coming. I was so focused on the external threats, the competitors, the hostile board members. I never thought..." She swallowed hard. "I never thought someone would get close enough to betray me from the inside." "That's not a weakness, Vivian. That's being human. Being human is what got me into this mess." She pulled her hands away, standing abruptly and moving to the window. "If I hadn't signed that contract, if I hadn't been so desperate for protection, if I hadn't brought you into this..." "Hey." Mason followed her, turning her to face him. "Don't do that. Don't rewrite history to make yourself the villain. You made a choice. We both made a choice. And whatever happens next, I don't regret it." "You should." Tears glistened in her eyes. "The press is going to crucify you. They're going to dig into your past, your finances, everything. They're going to paint you as a gold digger, a con artist, a man who sold himself for medical bills." "Let them." Vivian stared at him. What? Let them say whatever they want. Mason's voice was steady, calmer than he felt. I know who I am. Ellie knows who I am. And you know who I am. Everyone else can think whatever they want. It's not that simple. It is, actually. He cupped her face in his hands. The truth is the truth, Vivian. We started as a contract. We became something else. That's not a scandal. That's a love story. Her breath caught. A love story? Yeah. He smiled despite everything. A weird, unconventional, completely unexpected love story. But a love story nonetheless. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, something shifted in her expression, the defeat giving way to something harder, something more familiar. You're right, she said. The truth is the truth. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Richard wants a fight. Her jaw set, and I'm going to give him one. The next 48 hours were chaos. The story spread like wildfire, picked up by every major news outlet in the country. Mason's face was everywhere, his background dissected and analyzed, every struggling year of his life laid bare for public consumption. The narrative took shape quickly. Poor construction worker seduces billionaire heiress with sob story about sick daughter. The comments were brutal. He stopped reading them after the first day. Ellie, mercifully, was shielded from most of it. Margaret had taken on the role of guardian with fierce determination, keeping the television off and the tablets hidden. But Mason caught his daughter looking at him sometimes with questions in her eyes, questions he didn't know how to answer. Why are there so many cars outside, Daddy? Some people are curious about where we live, Bug. Are they nice people? I don't know, but we're staying inside until they go away. Okay. A pause. Is Vivian okay? She looks sad. She's fighting some bad guys at work, but she's very strong. She'll be okay. Ellie nodded, accepting this with the simple faith of childhood. Can I draw her a picture to make her feel better? Mason's throat tightened. I think she'd love that, Bug. That night, Vivian came home late, as she had every night since the story broke. But this time, something was different. Instead of retreating to her study, she sought them out, finding Mason and Ellie in the living room where they'd been watching a movie. I have news, she said. Mason paused the film. Ellie immediately held up her drawing, a crayon depiction of 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow. I made this for you, she announced, because Daddy said you were fighting bad guys and I wanted you to feel better. Vivian's composure cracked. She crossed the room and knelt before Ellie, taking the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. For a long moment, she just stared at it, at the 3 figures that clearly represented them, at the rainbow that arched overhead like a promise. It's beautiful, she whispered. That's you in the blue dress, Ellie explained, pointing. And that's Daddy with the messy hair, and that's me in the middle because I'm the smallest, and we're all holding hands because that's what families do. Vivian looked up at Mason, and her eyes were bright with tears. Yes, she said softly. That's what families do. After Ellie was in bed, they sat together in the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between them. The emergency board meeting is tomorrow, Vivian said. Richard's called for a vote of no confidence. He's got enough allies to force one. What happens if you lose? I'm out. They'll appoint someone else as CEO, probably one of Richard's puppets, and everything my father built. She stopped, her jaw tightening. It won't matter. It'll all be gone anyway. Mason reached across the table, covering her hand with his. What's your plan? I'm going to tell the truth. She met his eyes. All of it. The contract, yes. But also what happened after. How you stayed by my side during Ellie's surgery. How you taught me to read bedtime stories. How you looked at me in the hospital waiting room and told me I wasn't empty, just scared. Her voice broke. I'm going to tell them that I hired a husband and found a family. Will that be enough? I don't know. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. But it's the truth, and you were right. The truth is all we have. Mason was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and started typing. What are you doing? Calling in reinforcements. He finished the text and set the phone down. Elena Rodriguez. My old neighbor. The woman who watched Ellie for years while I worked 3 jobs to keep us alive. If the board wants to know who I really am, they should hear it from someone who was there. Vivian's eyes widened. You're bringing witnesses? You're not the only one who can play this game. He smiled grimly. Richard wants to paint me as a con artist? Fine. Let's see how that narrative holds up when a 60-year-old grandmother tells them about the night I drove Ellie to the ER with a fever, then went straight to work because I couldn't afford to miss a shift. Mason, I'm not letting you fight this alone. He stood, pulling her up with him. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's the deal now, the real deal. Vivian stared at him for a long moment. Then she kissed him. Not gently, not cautiously, but with all the fear and hope and desperation of a woman who'd finally found something worth fighting for. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I should have said it before. I should have said it 1,000 times, but I was scared, and now everything's falling apart, and I can't. I know. He pulled her close, holding her together while she trembled. I know. And I love you too, no matter what happens tomorrow. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while outside the mansion's walls the world prepared to tear them apart. The boardroom was a battlefield disguised as a conference room. 20 chairs around an oval table, each occupied by someone whose net worth exceeded most people's wildest dreams. At the head sat Richard, smug and polished, in a suit that probably cost more than Mason's first car. Around him sat his allies, a mix of old money and older prejudices, each wearing the same expression of calculated satisfaction. Vivian entered last, Mason at her side. If the board expected her to look defeated, they were disappointed. She dressed for war, a crimson suit that stood out against the sea of gray and navy, her hair pulled back in the severe knot she'd abandoned months ago. She looked exactly like what she was, a CEO prepared to defend her throne. But Mason noticed the tremor in her fingers as she took her seat. He noticed everything now. Shall we begin? Richard's voice oozed false courtesy. I believe everyone's reviewed the documentation. Documentation that was obtained through corporate espionage, Vivian said coolly. I'll be filing charges against the employee responsible, as well as exploring legal action against whoever received the stolen materials. The materials in question reveal a pattern of fraud, Richard countered. A fake marriage, arranged specifically to manipulate this board. The marriage is legal, registered with the state of California. Mr. Hale and I share a residence, share responsibility for a child, and share a life together. Vivian's voice didn't waver. The contract you're so eager to publicize was a starting point, nothing more. A starting point? Richard's smile widened. That required separate bedrooms and prohibited physical intimacy. Tell me, Ms. Cross, does that sound like a real marriage to you? It sounds like 2 people being honest about their circumstances. Mason spoke for the first time, and every head in the room swiveled toward him. Vivian needed protection from exactly this kind of attack. I needed help for my daughter. We made a deal, and then we fell in love. Richard's smile faltered. Mr. Hale, I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly. Mason stood, and something in his posture, something in the way he held himself, made several board members shift uncomfortably. You see a construction worker, a handyman, someone who couldn't possibly belong in this room. And you're right, I don't belong here. I've never belonged in places like this. He paused, letting the words land. But Vivian does. She's been fighting for this company her entire adult life. She sacrificed everything, her time, her health, her personal relationships, to protect what her father built. And now you want to destroy her because she made one unconventional choice? Because she found someone who didn't care about her money? This isn't about you, Mr. Hale, Richard said, but his composure was cracking. Yes, it is. It's entirely about me. Because if I were anyone else, if I were someone from your world, someone with the right background and the right connections, none of this would matter. You'd call it a whirlwind romance. You'd put it in the society pages. But because I'm nobody, because I used to fix toilets for a living, suddenly it's a scandal. Mason turned to face the board directly. Here's the truth. The whole truth. 18 months ago, my daughter was dying. Her heart was failing, and I couldn't afford the surgery that would save her. Vivian offered me a deal. 3 years of marriage in exchange for Ellie's medical care. I signed it in about 30 seconds, because that's what parents do. We sell whatever we have to save our kids. He could feel Vivian's eyes on him, could feel the intensity of her gaze. What I didn't expect was falling in love. I didn't expect to spend nights in a hospital waiting room, holding hands with a woman I barely knew while doctors operated on my daughter's heart. I didn't expect to learn that beneath all the ice and all the armor, Vivian Cross is the kindest person I've ever met. I didn't expect to watch her read bedtime stories, badly at first, then beautifully, because my daughter asked and she couldn't say no. His voice cracked and he let it. The contract was real. So was everything that came after. You can believe whatever you want. You can vote however Richard tells you to vote. But you should know what you're destroying. Not a scandal, not a fraud, a family. Silence filled the boardroom. Mason sat down, his heart pounding, and Vivian's hand found his under the table. Well, Richard said, recovering his composure, that was moving. But this board isn't here to evaluate fairy tales. We're here to assess whether Miss Cross is fit to lead this company. Then assess this. Vivian's voice cut through the room like a blade. Under my leadership, Cross Industries has increased revenue by 47%. We've expanded into 3 new markets. We've reduced operational costs by 12%, while increasing employee satisfaction to its highest levels in company history. She pulled a folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. You'll find audited financial statements, independent assessments, and a report from McKinsey on our projected growth over the next 5 years. Whatever you think of my personal choices, my professional record speaks for itself. The issue isn't your competence, Richard said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. It's your judgment. You lied to this board. I protected my privacy. There's a difference. You created a false impression. I created a marriage. Vivian stood, and something in her presence silenced the room. A real one. One that started unconventionally, yes. One that I didn't expect to become what it became. But if that's grounds for removal, then I'd ask you to examine your own relationships with similar scrutiny. She paused, letting that land. I know what you've said about me in private, Richard. I know you've been waiting for years to find a weakness, an angle, anything you could use to take me down. And maybe this is it. Maybe you finally won. Her voice hardened. But if you vote me out today, you're not just removing a CEO. You're telling the world that this company values appearances over results. That we'd rather be led by someone who looks the part than someone who can actually do the job. And that's a message that will follow Cross Industries for years to come. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face had gone red, his carefully constructed composure crumbling under the weight of Vivian's words. Around the table, board members exchanged glances, the certainty they'd walked in with visibly shaking. I move to table the vote, said a woman at the far end of the table. Harrison, Mason remembered, one of Richard's allies, or so they'd thought. Seconded, said another voice. Richard's head snapped up. On what grounds? On the grounds that we've clearly been presented with incomplete information, Harrison said calmly, and that a decision of this magnitude deserves more thorough consideration than a single meeting can provide. That's ridiculous. We have everything we need. We have a leaked contract and a tabloid scandal, Harrison interrupted. What we don't have is context. What we don't have is a full picture of Mrs. Cross's leadership over the past 18 months. I suggest we adjourn, conduct a proper review, and reconvene in 30 days. The vote to table passed 11-9. Richard's face was a mask of fury as the board members filed out, but there was nothing he could do. The battle wasn't over, but he hadn't won. Not today. Mason and Vivian walked out together, hands still intertwined. You were incredible, he said, once they were alone in the elevator. So were you. She leaned against him, some of the tension finally draining from her shoulders. That speech about what parents do to save their kids, I think that's what turned Harrison. She has grandchildren. I noticed the pictures on her desk. Vivian laughed, a real laugh, exhausted and relieved and somehow still beautiful. You noticed the pictures. I notice everything now. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Comes with loving someone. The elevator opened on the lobby, and they stepped out into chaos. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions. The press had gathered in force, hungry for blood, for scandal, for whatever drama the cross heiress and her contract husband could provide. Vivian's hand tightened on his. "Ready?" she asked. "No." Mason squared his shoulders. "But let's do it anyway." They walked into the storm together. The press coverage over the following weeks was relentless. Every detail of their lives was dissected and analyzed. Mason's past was excavated and displayed for public consumption, from his high school GPA to his deceased wife's medical records. Vivian's every business decision was re-examined through the lens of the scandal, as if her entire career could be dismissed because of one unconventional choice. But something unexpected happened. The narrative started to shift. It began with Elena Rodriguez, who gave an interview to a local news station about the night Mason had carried Ellie through a thunderstorm because their car had broken down and he couldn't afford a tow truck. Then came the nurses from the children's hospital, speaking anonymously about the father who'd slept in a chair for weeks because he couldn't bear to leave his daughter's side. Then a construction worker Mason had once employed, who talked about the day Mason had given him half his own paycheck when the man's wife needed surgery. Story by story, a different picture emerged. Not a con artist, not a gold digger, just a man who'd been struggling to survive, who'd made an impossible choice for love of his child, and who'd somehow found his way to something real. Vivian's numbers came back too. The independent review showed exactly what she'd claimed: growth, stability, leadership that had steered the company through multiple crises. The board began to question not whether she should be removed, but whether Richard's campaign against her had been motivated by professional concerns at all. And then, on a quiet Tuesday evening, Richard made a mistake. Mason was home with Ellie when his phone rang, an unknown number that he almost didn't answer. "Mr. Hale." Richard's voice was oily, confident, the voice of a man who thought he still held cards to play. "I think we should talk." "I have nothing to say to you. You might change your mind when you hear what I'm offering." A pause for effect. $5 million. In exchange for your testimony that the marriage was entirely fraudulent, that Vivian manipulated you, paid you off, used your daughter as a prop. With your statement, the board will have no choice but to remove her. Mason's hand tightened on the phone. "You're trying to bribe me." "I'm offering you a way out. Think about it, Mr. Hale. $5 million. You could take your daughter and disappear. Start fresh somewhere, away from all this. Away from a woman who bought you like furniture." "She didn't buy me, didn't she?" The contract was quite explicit about the financial arrangements. Medical coverage, school tuition, a trust fund, all contingent on your performance as a husband. Richard's voice turned silky. "Don't you ever wonder if what you feel is real, or if it's just gratitude? The confusion of a desperate man who mistook rescue for love?" The words hit somewhere deep, somewhere vulnerable. "I know what I feel," Mason said, but his voice wavered. "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trapped, bound to a woman who controls every aspect of your life, your housing, your daughter's education, your very identity in the public eye. Is that love, Mr. Hale? Or is that just another kind of prison?" Mason closed his eyes. For one terrible moment, the doubt crept in, the questions he'd never allowed himself to ask. Was this real? Could it be real? Or had he just fallen in love with the feeling of being saved? Then Ellie's voice floated in from the living room. "Daddy, the movie's starting. Come watch with me." And just like that, the doubt vanished. "You know what I think?" Mason said quietly. "I think you've never loved anyone in your entire life. I think you've never had someone look at you the way Ellie looks at Vivian when she reads her bedtime stories. I think you've never known what it feels like to have someone believe in you, not because of what you can give them, but because of who you are." "Mr. Hale, I'm not finished." His voice hardened. "You asked if what I feel is real. The answer is yes. Yes, it started as a contract. Yes, I was desperate. Yes, she saved me in ways I can never repay. But that's not why I love her. I love her because she's terrified of connection, and she tries anyway. I love her because she reads bedtime stories in funny voices, even though it embarrasses her. I love her because she looks at my daughter like she's the most precious thing in the world, and maybe she is." He paused. "You can keep your $5 million, Richard. I'd rather be broke in love than rich and whatever the hell you are." He hung up. 10 seconds later, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You'll regret this." Mason stared at the message. Then he walked into the living room, sat down beside his daughter, and started the movie. Some things were more important than fear. Vivian came home late that night, as she had most nights since the crisis began. But this time, she didn't head for her study. She found Mason in the kitchen, staring at his phone with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What happened?" He showed her the call log, Richard's number, the text message. Vivian's face went pale, then red, then settled into something cold and dangerous. "He tried to bribe you. $5 million for testimony that you manipulated me. And you said no." "I said a lot of things." Mason set down the phone. "Mostly I told him he was pathetic and didn't know what love was." Something flickered in Vivian's eyes. "You defended me. I defended us." He reached for her hand. "Vivian, he asked me something. Something that's been rattling around in my head ever since." "What?" "He asked if what I feel is real, or if it's just gratitude, confusion, the desperation of a man who mistook rescue for love." Vivian's breath caught. "Mason, I know the answer. I've known it for months. But I need to say it out loud to you, so there's no doubt." He stood, closing the distance between them. "I love you. Not because you saved my daughter. Not because you gave me a home. Not because of the money or the security or any of that. I love you because of who you are when no one's watching. The woman who cries at bedtime stories. The woman who keeps M&Ms hidden in her desk drawer because she thinks no one knows. The woman who looks at me sometimes like I'm the first real thing she's seen in years." Vivian's composure shattered. The tears came fast and hard, streaming down her face while she tried and failed to hold them back. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared that this is all going to disappear, that you're going to wake up one day and realize you could do better, that Ellie's going to see me for what I really am and stop loving me, that Richard's going to win, and I'll lose everything, and I'll be alone again, like I've always been alone." Mason pulled her into his arms. "You're not alone," he said against her hair. "You haven't been alone since the day you sat in that parking lot and watched a stranger fall apart. You chose us, Vivian, and we chose you back. That's not going away. Not ever." She clung to him, trembling. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not." He smiled into her hair. "But you're stuck with me anyway. That's the deal." "The deal," she repeated, something almost like a laugh escaping her. "I thought I was so clever, drawing up that contract, controlling every variable, protecting myself from exactly this." "From what?" She pulled back, looking up at him with eyes still wet with tears. "From feeling this much, from needing someone this badly." She cupped his face in her hands. "From loving someone so completely that losing them would destroy me." Mason turned his head, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You're not going to lose me. You can't promise that. Watch me." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and the world outside with its scandals and schemes and shark-infested boardrooms faded into irrelevance. This was what mattered. This was what was real, and nothing Richard could do would ever take it away. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after Richard's failed bribery attempt, Vivian received a call from Harrison, the board member who'd moved to table the vote. "I have something you need to see," Harrison said. "Can you come to my office and bring your husband?" They arrived together, hands linked, presenting the united front that had become second nature. Harrison's office was smaller than expected, cluttered with family photos and children's artwork, the space of someone who actually lived her life rather than just performing it. She rose to greet them, her expression grave. "I should have come to you earlier," she said, "but I needed to be sure. I needed proof." "Proof of what?" Harrison slid a folder across her desk. "Richard's been embezzling from the company for years. Small amounts at first, hidden in budget adjustments and expense accounts. But it's grown. As of my last count, he's siphoned off nearly $12 million. Vivian's face went white. "How did you find this?" "I didn't. My grandson's a forensic accountant. He noticed some irregularities when he was helping me review my portfolio. At first I thought it was a mistake, but Harrison shook her head. It's not a mistake, it's theft. And he's been covering his tracks by keeping you distracted with personal attacks. Mason felt the pieces click into place. The leaked contract, the tabloid story, the bribery attempt. He wasn't trying to remove Vivian because of the marriage. He was trying to remove her before she discovered what he'd been doing. Exactly. Harrison's jaw tightened. I've been on this board for 15 years. I've disagreed with Vivian on plenty of things, but I've never doubted her integrity. Richard, on the other hand, she trailed off. Let's just say this explains a lot. Vivian was already reaching for her phone. I need to call legal and the SEC, and already done. Harrison held up a hand. I filed the initial report this morning. Richard's assets are being frozen as we speak. By tomorrow, he'll be facing federal charges. The relief that flooded Vivian's face was almost painful to witness. Why? She asked. Why help me? I thought you were one of his allies. Harrison smiled sadly. I was his ally because I believed you were too young, too inexperienced, too female to run this company. I was wrong. She glanced at Mason. Seeing you two together these past weeks, watching how you've handled this crisis, it reminded me what real leadership looks like. Not the kind that comes from wealth or connections, the kind that comes from character. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, she said finally. I won't forget this. You don't have to thank me. Just keep proving me wrong about everything else. The news broke the next morning. Richard was arrested at his home, led out in handcuffs while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. The story that had defined the past month, the scandal of the contract marriage, evaporated overnight, replaced by something far more salacious. The disgraced executive who'd tried to destroy an innocent woman to cover his own crimes. The narrative shifted completely. Vivian Cross wasn't a fraud. She was a victim, a target. A woman who'd been fighting for her company while a snake worked to bring her down from within. And Mason Hale wasn't a con artist. He was the man who'd stood beside her through it all. The emergency board meeting was reconvened, but this time the vote was unanimous. Vivian retained her position as CEO. And in a moment that surprised everyone, Harrison nominated Mason for an advisory role, a consultant position that would formalize his presence in Vivian's professional life, the way he'd already formalized his presence in her personal one. You don't have to accept, Vivian said afterward, when they were alone in her office. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Mason looked around the room, at the glass walls and the city spread out below, at the empire Vivian had fought so hard to protect. I didn't sign up for any of this, he said. I signed up to save my daughter. Everything else has been a surprise. He turned to face her. But it's been a good surprise, the best surprise of my life. Vivian's eyes glistened. I love you, she said. I keep saying it because I keep meaning it, because I spent so many years not saying it to anyone, and now I can't stop. Don't stop. He pulled her close. Don't ever stop. They stood there in the office, holding each other, while the city lights glittered below and the future stretched out before them like a promise. The storm had passed, and what remained was everything they'd built together. That night, when they got home, Ellie was waiting in the foyer with Margaret, her face alight with a question she'd been holding all day. Did you win? She asked. Did you beat the bad guys? Vivian knelt down to her level, something she did easily now, naturally, without the hesitation that had marked her early interactions with the child. We won, she said. The bad guys are gone. Ellie threw her arms around Vivian's neck. I knew you would, she whispered. You're the strongest person ever. Daddy says so. Vivian's arms tightened around the small body. Your daddy is pretty strong himself. I know. Ellie pulled back, her face serious. That's why you're perfect together. Because strong people need other strong people. That's what Ms. Patterson says about teamwork. Mason laughed, sweeping his daughter into his arms. Ms. Patterson sounds pretty smart. She is. She says I'm her best student. Ellie yawned. Can we have ice cream to celebrate? It's past your bedtime, Bug. But it's a special day. Mason looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Mason. I suppose, Vivian said slowly, that special days deserve special exceptions. Ellie's face lit up, and in the kitchen of the mansion that had once felt like a museum, three people who'd become a family sat together, eating ice cream and laughing and being exactly what they'd never expected to be. Happy. The months that followed Richard's arrest were the closest thing to peace Mason had ever known. Spring settled over Los Angeles with its usual indifference, flowers blooming in the mansion's gardens while the city below continued its endless churn. But inside the walls that had once felt like a prison, something had fundamentally shifted. The silence that used to echo through empty hallways was gone now, replaced by laughter and footsteps and the constant, beautiful chaos of a family learning to exist together. Ellie thrived in ways that still surprised Mason every day. Her heart, once so fragile, now powered a 6-year-old who seemed determined to explore every corner of her world. She'd started gymnastics, as she'd wanted, and her Saturday mornings were filled with cartwheels and somersaults that made Mason's own heart stop every time she launched herself into the air. But the doctors kept confirming what the evidence already showed. She was healthy. She was whole. She was going to be okay. And Vivian. Vivian was transforming in ways that were harder to name but impossible to miss. The armor she'd worn like a second skin was still there, but it came off more easily now. She left work before sunset most days. She learned to delegate, to trust, to let go of the absolute control that had once been her only defense. She read bedtime stories without embarrassment, did the voices with increasing enthusiasm, and had developed a particular talent for dragon roars that sent Ellie into fits of giggles. She smiled now. Not the calculated smile of press photos or the desperate smile of crisis management. Real smiles, surprised out of her by small moments. The kind of smiles that reached her eyes and lingered on her lips and made Mason's chest ache with something he'd stopped trying to name. Love, probably. Or maybe gratitude. Or maybe just the simple, profound joy of watching someone become who they were always meant to be. The contract's end date approached like a distant shore, visible on the horizon, but not yet close enough to touch. They didn't talk about it often, but Mason was aware of it in the way you're aware of weather changing, a shift in pressure that hadn't yet become a storm. 2 years and 8 months had passed. 4 months remained. And then what? The question hung in the air between them, unasked and unanswered, until Vivian brought it up on a quiet Sunday afternoon. They were in the garden, watching Ellie chase butterflies through the flowers, when Vivian turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. The contract expires in October. Mason nodded. I know. We should talk about what happens after. We should. But neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, filled with birdsong and Ellie's laughter and the weight of everything they'd built together. I don't want you to go, Vivian said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason turned to look at her. She was staring straight ahead, watching Ellie, but her hands were clenched in her lap. Who said anything about going? The contract does. She swallowed hard. 3 years, then divorce, clean break. That was the deal. That was the deal we signed. Mason reached for her hand, gently uncurling her fingers. But we're not the same people who signed that deal, Vivian. We haven't been for a long time. I know. Her voice cracked. But I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to ask for what I want. I've spent my whole life making deals, negotiating terms, putting everything in writing so no one could hurt me. And now? She finally looked at him, and her eyes were glistening. Now I want something that can't be put in a contract, and it terrifies me. Mason brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. What do you want? You. The word came out like a confession. I want you. I want Ellie. I want this life we've built together. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're beside me and go to sleep every night knowing you'll still be there. Her voice broke. I want a family. A real one. Not because of a contract, but because we chose each other. Mason's heart swelled until he thought it might burst. Then that's what we'll have. It's not that simple. It is, actually. He shifted closer, cupping her face in his hands. Vivian Cross, I love you. I've loved you since you held my hand in a hospital waiting room and promised we'd face whatever came together. I've loved you through scandals and boardrooms and bedtime stories, and I'll love you long after any contract expires. Mason, I'm not finished. He smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. The deal we signed was survival. protection. Two strangers using each other to get what they needed. But that's not what we are anymore. We're partners, we're parents, we're family. He paused, making sure she was listening. So here's what I'm proposing. Forget the original contract, forget the terms and conditions and exit clauses. Let's write a new deal. One that doesn't have an end date. One that says we're in this together, not for 3 years, but for the rest of our lives. Vivian stared at him. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to stay married to me. He grinned. Technically, we're still married. I'm just asking to make it real. A laugh escaped her, watery and disbelieving. We're already real. Then let's make it official. No contracts, no terms, just us choosing each other every single day. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she kissed him. It wasn't gentle or hesitant. It was fierce and desperate. The kiss of a woman who'd spent her whole life guarding her heart and was finally letting someone in. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, to all of it, to everything. Ellie chose that moment to come running back, her hands cupped around something precious. Daddy, Vivian, look what I caught! They broke apart, but not quickly enough to hide the tears on Vivian's face. What is it, Bug? Ellie opened her hands to reveal a butterfly, purple and iridescent, its wings beating slowly against her palms. It's the prettiest one I ever saw. She looked up at them with shining eyes. Can I keep it? Butterflies don't like to be kept, sweetheart, Vivian said gently. They need to fly free. Ellie's face fell. But I want to keep it forever. You can keep it in your heart. Vivian knelt down, bringing herself to Ellie's level. That's where the most important things live. The things that matter so much that no cage could ever hold them. Ellie considered this with the gravity only a 6-year-old could muster. Is that where I keep Mommy? She asked. In my heart? Mason's throat tightened. Yeah, Bug. That's where you keep her. Good. Ellie nodded solemnly. Then I'll keep the butterfly there too. She opened her hands, watching the butterfly flutter away into the garden. And I'll keep you and Vivian there, so I never lose any of you. Vivian's composure shattered. She gathered Ellie into her arms, holding her close, and over his daughter's shoulder, Mason saw the tears streaming down her face. You'll never lose us, Vivian whispered. Never. The decision to have a real wedding came a week later, born out of a conversation that started practical and ended somewhere far more emotional. We should do something, Vivian said, scrolling through her calendar, to mark the transition, the end of the contract, the beginning of whatever this is. A ceremony? Something small, just us. She looked up. Unless you want something bigger. I know I deprived you of a real wedding the first time. If you want the church and the guests and all of it, I'll do whatever you want. Mason thought about it. His first wedding, to Sarah, had been small too. A courthouse ceremony with their closest friends, followed by a reception in her parents' backyard. Sarah had worn a dress she'd found at a consignment shop, and Mason had worn his only suit, and they danced under string lights until their feet ached. It had been perfect. Not because of the venue or the guest list, but because of who was standing beside him. I want whatever makes you happy, he said. But if I'm being honest, I don't need a big ceremony. I just need you. Vivian's expression softened. What about Ellie? What about her? She should be part of it. Vivian set down her phone. She's the reason any of this exists. The reason you signed the contract, the reason I started to change, the reason we became a family. She should be there when we make it official. Mason smiled. You want her to be in the wedding? I want her to perform the wedding. At his look of surprise, Vivian laughed. Not legally, obviously. We'll still need someone official to sign the paperwork. But the ceremony itself, the vows, the rings, all of it. I want Ellie to be the one who marries us. The idea was so perfectly, beautifully right that Mason couldn't believe he hadn't thought of it himself. She's gonna love that. I know. Vivian's smile widened. I asked Margaret to help her make an officiating robe. Purple, of course. Of course. They told Ellie that evening, and her reaction was everything they'd hoped for. I get to marry you? She bounced on her bed, too excited to stay still. For real? Like the people on TV? For real, Mason confirmed. You'll stand up in front of us and say the special words, and then we'll be married forever. Forever and ever? Forever and ever. Ellie's face grew serious. What words do I say? Whatever you want, Vivian said. Whatever feels right to you. Can I practice? You can practice as much as you need. Okay. Ellie nodded with the gravity of a 6-year-old accepting a sacred responsibility. I'm going to write the best words ever, the most beautiful words in the whole world. She spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Mason would find her in her room, hunched over papers, tongue poking out in concentration as she worked on her speech. She refused to show anyone what she'd written, insisting it had to be a surprise, but the intensity of her focus was endearing and slightly alarming. She's taking this very seriously, Margaret observed one afternoon. She takes everything seriously, Mason said. She got that from her mother. Margaret's expression softened. She got a lot of things from her mother, but she's getting new things too, from both of you. The ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday in late September, 2 weeks before the original contract's end date. The location was simple, the backyard of the mansion, where Ellie had built her fairy castles and chased butterflies and learned what it meant to have a home. The guest list was even simpler. Margaret, Elena Rodriguez, Dr. Okonkwo, and Harrison, who'd become something like a friend to Vivian in the months since the crisis. No press, no cameras, no fanfare, just family. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of September day that felt like summer's last gift before autumn arrived. Mason woke early, too nervous to sleep, and found Vivian already awake beside him. They'd been sharing a room for months now, the separate bedrooms cloths of the original contract long since abandoned. It still felt new sometimes, waking up to her warmth, feeling her presence in the darkness, a gift he'd never expected to receive. Nervous? She asked. Terrified. She laughed softly. Me too. You've done this before. The courthouse, the judge, all of it. That wasn't a wedding. Vivian turned to face him, her expression soft in the morning light. That was a transaction. This is different. How? This is real. She traced her finger along his jaw. This is what I was too scared to want the first time, what I convinced myself I didn't need. And now? Now I know I was wrong. She kissed him gently. Now I know that needing someone isn't weakness. It's just being human. They got dressed separately at Ellie's insistence. It's bad luck to see each other before the wedding, she'd announced, having absorbed various wedding traditions from sources Mason couldn't identify. You have to stay apart until it's time. So Mason went to one wing of the house, Vivian to another, and Ellie fluttered between them like a purple-clad butterfly, making sure everyone was following her rules. The ceremony was set for late afternoon, when the light in the garden would be golden and soft. Mason waited in his room, wearing a suit that Vivian had chosen, fidgeting with cufflinks he still hadn't mastered. Elena Rodriguez found him there, her weathered face creased with a smile. You look good, mijo. Nervous, but good. I don't know why I'm nervous. He ran a hand through his hair. We're already married. This is just formality. This is the opposite of formality. Elena sat down beside him. This is you choosing her. Not because you had to, not because you needed something from her, but because you love her. That's the scariest thing in the world. Is it supposed to feel this terrifying? The best things always do. She reached out, straightening his tie. Sarah would be proud of you, you know. Mason's throat tightened. He hadn't expected to hear her name today, but somehow it felt right. You think so? I know so. Elena's eyes glistened. She loved you more than anything. She would have wanted you to be happy, to find someone who sees you the way she did. Vivian sees me. I know she does. That's why I'm giving you my blessing. She stood, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Now go marry your wife, mijo. Again. The garden had been transformed. Strings of lights hung from the trees, not yet lit but promising magic when the sun went down. White chairs were arranged in two small rows, occupied by Margaret and Harrison and Dr. Okonkwo, their faces turned toward the archway that had been erected at the garden's center. The archway was covered in flowers, purple and white, and beneath it stood Ellie. She was wearing a purple dress with a matching cape that Margaret had clearly labored over, and in her hands was a small notebook containing the words she'd spent weeks preparing. Her expression was solemn, almost comically serious, as she watched Mason approach. "You may stand there, Daddy," she said, pointing to a spot beside the archway. "And no talking until I say so." "Yes, ma'am." The music started, a simple melody played by Margaret on a portable speaker, and Mason turned to watch Vivian emerge from the house. She was wearing white. Not the cream silk of their first wedding, but true white, a simple dress that flowed around her like water. Her hair was down, adorned with tiny white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of purple orchids that matched Ellie's dress. She was beautiful. She was everything, and she was walking toward him with tears already streaming down her face. Mason forgot how to breathe. Vivian reached the archway and took her place beside him, their hands finding each other automatically, fingers intertwining. Ellie cleared her throat. "We are gathered here today," she read from her notebook, her voice high and clear, "to marry Daddy and Vivian. For real this time." A soft laugh rippled through the small audience. "When Daddy first told me about the lady with no smile, I didn't understand." Ellie looked up from her notes, her eyes moving between them. "I didn't understand why we were moving to a big house, or why there was a lady who looked so sad all the time. But Daddy said we were going to be a family, and families take care of each other." Mason felt Vivian's hand tighten in his. "At first I was scared," Ellie continued. "The house was too big and too quiet, and the lady never laughed. But then I got sick, and the lady wasn't sad anymore. She was scared, like Daddy was scared, and she held his hand all night, even though her hand was cold." Vivian's breath caught. "That's when I knew." Ellie's voice grew stronger. "I knew that the lady with no smile wasn't really sad. She was just waiting for someone to love her the way Daddy loves me, the way Mommy used to love both of us." Mason's vision blurred. "So here are the vows I wrote." Ellie lifted her notebook higher. "Daddy, do you promise to keep making Vivian laugh even when she forgets how?" "I do," Mason managed. "Do you promise to hold her hand when she's scared and hug her when she's sad, and never ever let her feel lonely again?" "I do." Ellie turned to Vivian. "Vivian, do you promise to keep reading bedtime stories even when you're tired?" Vivian laughed through her tears. "I do." "Do you promise to be patient when Daddy burns the pancakes and to pretend they're good anyway?" "I do." "And do you promise," Ellie's voice softened, "to be my mom, not to replace my real mom because she's in heaven and I keep her in my heart, but to be my other mom, the one who's here, the one who holds my hand and brushes my hair and tells me everything's going to be okay?" Vivian's composure shattered completely. She knelt down, heedless of her white dress on the grass, and gathered Ellie into her arms. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I promise. I promise. I promise. I promise." Ellie hugged her back, small arms wrapped tight around Vivian's neck. "Good." She pulled away, her own eyes wet. "Then by the power invested in me by myself, I now pronounce you married. For real this time. Forever and ever." She looked up at Mason. "You can kiss her now, Daddy." Mason didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Vivian to her feet and kissed her, really kissed her, while their tiny audience cheered and Ellie bounced beside them. "We're a family!" Ellie shouted. "We're a real family!" And in that garden, surrounded by flowers and fairy lights, and the people who mattered most, 3 broken pieces finally became whole. The reception, such as it was, moved indoors as the sun set. Margaret had prepared a feast, refusing all offers of professional catering, insisting that family meals should be made by family. The dining room table groaned under the weight of dishes that represented everyone's favorites: enchiladas from Elena's recipe, lasagna that Margaret's mother had taught her, even hospital cafeteria mac and cheese because Ellie had developed a taste for it during her recovery. Harrison raised a toast, her voice warm with an affection that surprised Mason. "To Vivian and Mason," she said, lifting her glass. "Who taught an old board member that sometimes the most unexpected combinations make the best partnerships? May your merger be profitable in all the ways that matter. Dr. Okonkwo went next. To Ellie, he said, smiling at the little girl who was systematically working her way through every dessert on the table, whose heart, it turns out, was never the problem. It was just waiting for enough love to fill it. Elena's toast was simple. To second chances, she said, her weathered face soft with emotion, and the courage to take them. When it was Margaret's turn, she simply raised her glass and said, "About time." The laughter that followed was the warmest sound Mason had ever heard. After dinner, after cake, after Ellie had finally crashed on the couch with Mr. Trunks clutched against her chest, Vivian found Mason in the garden. He was standing beneath the archway, now dark except for the fairy lights that twinkled overhead, looking up at stars that were just beginning to appear. "Hiding?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. Savoring. He pulled her close. "I want to remember every detail of this day. It was perfect. It was us." He smiled. That made it perfect. They stood together in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the garden, the distant hum of the city, the soft whisper of wind through leaves. "I have something for you," Vivian said. "You do?" She pulled an envelope from somewhere in her dress, handing it to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What's this?" "Open it." Mason did. Inside was a single sheet of paper, formal letterhead, legal language. His eyes scanned the words, and his heart stopped. "This is my resignation." Vivian's voice was steady. "Effective at the end of the month. But the company will survive without me." She turned to face him. "I've spent my entire life fighting for something I inherited, something I never chose. My father's legacy, my father's empire, my father's expectations. Vivian, let me finish." She took his hands in hers. "In that boardroom, when I was defending myself against Richard's attack, I realized something. I've been so focused on protecting what my father built that I forgot to build anything of my own." "But you love that company." "I loved the fight." Vivian shook her head. "I love proving everyone wrong, showing them that a woman could do what they said was impossible. But that's not love, Mason. That's survival, and I'm tired of surviving." She stepped closer, her eyes bright in the fairy light. "I want to live, really live. I want to wake up without 100 emails demanding my attention. I want to have breakfast with my family instead of conference calls. I want to be there when Ellie learns to do a cartwheel, and when you burn the pancakes, and when the garden blooms in spring." "What will you do?" "I don't know yet." She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Maybe consulting, maybe philanthropy. Maybe I'll learn to make pottery, or write terrible poetry, or do something completely useless and wonderful." "That doesn't sound like you." "No," she agreed. "It sounds like whoever I'm going to become, and I want to find out who that is." She paused. "With you, if you'll have me." Mason answered by kissing her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vivian was laughing. "I'll take that as a yes. You can take it as whatever you want." He rested his forehead against hers. "I'm just glad you're finally choosing yourself." "I'm choosing us." She cupped his face in her hands. "That's what I finally understand. Choosing myself and choosing us, it's the same thing. You make me better. You make me want to be better. And I spent so many years thinking that needing someone was weakness. And now? Now I know it's the opposite." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Now I know that the strongest thing I've ever done was letting myself love you." The night wrapped around them like a promise, and somewhere in the house, a little girl with a mended heart slept peacefully, dreaming of purple butterflies and forever families. The end of the contract came and went without ceremony. October 15th arrived on a Tuesday, marked on Vivian's calendar with a small red circle that had been there since the beginning. Mason found her staring at it that morning, coffee cooling in her hands. 3 years, she said softly. 3 years. Doesn't feel like 3 years. Feels like a lifetime. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and also like no time at all. "We should do something to mark it." She turned in his arms. "Burn the contract, maybe. Have a small ceremony. Or we could just let it pass." Mason shrugged. "It doesn't mean anything anymore? Not really. The paper was always just paper. What mattered was never in the contract. Vivian considered this. You're getting philosophical in your old age. I'm getting wise. He grinned. There's a difference. They spent the day like any other, which was, Mason realized, exactly the point. Breakfast with Ellie, who was full of stories about a boy named Marcus who'd pushed her on the swings and then apologized with a cookie. A walk in the garden while Vivian took her last few business calls, wrapping up projects she'd delegated months ago. Lunch in the kitchen, where Mason made grilled cheese sandwiches that were somehow both burned and undercooked. You're a marvel, Vivian observed, picking charred crust off her bread. I have many talents. Cooking is not among them. That's why I married a rich woman. We can afford takeout. She threw a piece of bread at him, and he caught it, and Ellie giggled at both of them, and it was perfect. That evening, after Ellie was in bed, Vivian disappeared into her study and emerged with a wooden box Mason had never seen before. What's that? Something I found. She set it on the coffee table between them. When I was cleaning out my office. It was in the back of a drawer I never opened. The box was old, clearly handmade, with a carved design on the lid that looked like flowers. My mother made it, Vivian said softly, before she died. I don't remember her making it, but I remember her giving it to me. She said it was for keeping important things. What kind of important things? Vivian lifted the lid. Inside were small treasures that told the story of a childhood Mason had never known. A pressed flower, faded to brown, but still recognizable as a rose. A photograph of a woman who looked startlingly like Vivian, her smile warm and unguarded in a way Vivian's had never been. A lock of hair tied with a ribbon. A folded piece of paper. I haven't opened this since I was 12, Vivian said. Since the year she died. I put it away and never looked at it again. Why are you looking now? Because I think I'm finally ready. She reached for the folded paper, hesitating before she opened it. Because I think I finally understand what she was trying to tell me. The paper was a letter, written in a hand that had clearly been shaking. Vivian read it silently, her face shifting through emotions Mason couldn't name. When she finished, she handed it to him without a word. My darling girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for that, sorrier than words can say. But I want you to know something important, something I hope you'll remember long after you've forgotten the sound of my voice. Love is not a weakness. I know your father will try to teach you otherwise. I know the world will try to make you hard, make you cold, make you think that needing someone is the worst thing you can do. But it's a lie, sweetheart. The biggest lie there is. The truth is that love is the only thing worth having, the only thing that lasts. All the money, all the power, all the success in the world, it means nothing if you have no one to share it with. So when you find someone who makes you feel safe, who makes you feel seen, who makes you feel like you can finally breathe, don't push them away. Don't build walls. Don't run. Stay. Love. Be loved. That's all I ever wanted for you. That's all that matters. I love you, my darling girl, forever and ever. Mom. Mason's vision blurred. He looked up to find Vivian watching him, tears streaming down her face. I forgot, she whispered. I forgot she told me that. I forgot that love was supposed to be the point. You didn't forget. Mason set down the letter and pulled her close. You just got lost for a while, and then you found your way back. You helped me find it. Ellie helped. He smiled through his own tears, and Margaret, and Harrison, and everyone who saw through the armor and loved you anyway. Vivian buried her face against his chest. I wish she could have met you, my mother. I wish she could have seen that I finally listened. Maybe she can. Mason pressed a kiss to her hair. Maybe she's watching right now, from wherever she is, with Sarah beside her. Maybe they're both happy that we found each other. Vivian laughed through her tears. That's a nice thought. It's the truth. He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. The people who love us don't really leave. They stay in our hearts. That's what you told Ellie about the butterfly. I did say that, didn't I? You were right. He kissed her forehead. You're right about a lot of things. I'm right about loving you. See? You're brilliant. They sat together on the couch, Vivian curled against him, the wooden box between them. Outside, the city hummed its endless song, but in here, In this space they'd carved out of the world, everything was quiet. Everything was home. Mason? I want to show Ellie the letter when she's older, when she can understand. Vivian's voice was soft. I want her to know that the women who came before her, her grandmother, her mother, they all believed in love. They all wanted her to be happy. She'll love that. And Vivian hesitated. I want to write my own letter, to put in the box, so that someday, if she needs to hear it, she'll know what I want for her too. What do you want for her? Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Everything, she finally said. I want her to be brave and kind and strong. I want her to fall in love and get her heart broken and fall in love again. I want her to make mistakes and learn from them and know that we'll love her no matter what. I want her to find someone who looks at her the way you look at me. How do I look at you? Like I'm the most precious thing in the world. Her voice cracked. Like you can't believe I'm real. I can't, Mason admitted. Every day, I wake up and wonder how I got so lucky, how a contract for survival turned into everything I ever wanted. It wasn't luck. Vivian lifted her head, meeting his eyes. It was choice. Every single day we chose each other. We're still choosing. And we'll keep choosing. Forever and ever? He kissed her softly. Forever and ever. The next morning brought the kind of chaos that had become their normal. Ellie bounded into their bedroom at dawn, demanding pancakes and announcing that Marcus had promised to share his cookies with her again, which apparently meant they were basically married now. Vivian emerged from the shower to find Mason attempting to braid Ellie's hair, a skill he had never mastered and would probably never master. You're making it worse, Ellie informed him. I'm doing my best. Your best is very bad. Noted. Vivian took over the braiding while Mason retreated to the kitchen where he burned the pancakes exactly as everyone expected. Margaret arrived with a fresh batch from her own kitchen, having anticipated this outcome, and breakfast was served to the sound of Ellie's running commentary on the social dynamics of first grade. It was chaotic and imperfect and absolutely wonderful. After breakfast, after Ellie had been dispatched to school with Margaret, Vivian found Mason in the garden. He was standing in the spot where they'd gotten married, looking at something in his hands. What's that? He held it up. A photograph, old and worn, of a woman holding a baby. Sarah, he said softly, and Ellie, when she was 3 days old. I found it this morning, tucked in the back of my wallet. I forgot I still had it. Vivian moved to stand beside him, studying the image. She was beautiful. She was. Mason's voice was thick. She would have loved you, you know. You're exactly her type. Her type? Stubborn, brilliant, secretly soft underneath all the armor. He smiled. She always said I needed someone who could challenge me, someone who wouldn't let me get away with anything. I definitely don't let you get away with anything. See? Perfect match. They stood together in the garden, the photograph between them like a bridge between past and present. I think she'd be happy, Vivian said finally, that Ellie has someone else who loves her, that you have someone else who loves you. I think so too. Mason tucked the photograph back into his wallet. She wasn't the jealous type, she just wanted everyone to be happy. Then she got her wish. Yeah. He turned to face Vivian and his eyes were bright with emotion. She got her wish. 6 months later, on a spring morning when the garden was bursting with color, Vivian made an announcement at breakfast. I have news. Mason looked up from his coffee. Ellie looked up from her cereal. What news? Ellie asked. Vivian took a deep breath. I'm going to have a baby. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Ellie screamed, not in horror, but in joy, a sound so high and pure that it could have shattered glass. She launched herself out of her chair and into Vivian's arms, knocking over her cereal in the process. A baby! I'm going to be a big sister! A real big sister! Mason sat frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. Vivian, I know. She was laughing and crying at the same time. Ellie still clutched against her. I know it wasn't planned. I know we didn't discuss it. But I went to the doctor last week because I'd been feeling off, and they ran some tests, and we're having a baby. We're having a baby. Mason crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, gathering both of them into his arms. His wife, his daughter, his family, growing by one more. Is it a boy or a girl? Ellie demanded. Can we name it Purple? Can it sleep in my room? Can I teach it to do cartwheels? We don't know yet, Vivian managed. It's too early to tell. I hope it's a girl. Boys are gross. Except Daddy and Marcus. Marcus isn't that gross. Mason laughed against Vivian's hair. Whatever it is, he said, it's going to be loved. That's all that matters. That's all that matters, Vivian echoed. And in the kitchen of a mansion that had once been a prison, surrounded by spilled cereal and morning sunlight and the chaotic joy of a family that had chosen each other, Mason Hale finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place, not a building, but these people, this love, forever and ever. The end.